a whole new world. A warm breeze swept across the sprawling grassy lawns of the State College. Spring had arrived at last, and with it the pressure of final exams, the anticipation of graduation. The college was abuzz with activity, the library filled with last-minute crammers, but the quad was just as packed with students desperate to get some sun after a long and cold winter. It was a stately old quad befitting a college steeped in tradition. The lawn was bounded on either side by brick century-old buildings, clothed in a dignified growth of ivy. Ancient trees lined the edges of the grass, filtering the sun for the students grouped around their roots. Most students were used to the beauty of the college in spring, taking it for granted. They had much more pressing thoughts on their minds, especially the seniors. Their college careers were nearing their ends, their adult lives unfolding before them, and for each this meant something different. Some were filled with ambition, others with trepidation. But as they sat amongst the trees thinking that their lives were about to undergo some major changes, not a one of them could have imagined just how right they were about that. At the foot of one of the largest trees on the quad, a group of 3 such seniors reclined in the shade, enjoying each other's company in silence for the time being. Brian, Megan, and Rachel had been friends since junior high. Of course they'd once been but a few members of a much bigger clique in high school, but with age things changed. Friends went to different colleges, others transferred or simply dropped out. A couple guys drunk or smoked their way to expulsion. So it was that only the 3 of them remained. But as their group shrank, they only grew closer, and that only made their impending graduation and separation that much harder to face. Brian, the lone young man of the group, was an average kind of guy. He was smart, he'd made it through the top state college in 4 years after all, but not a genius or even a nerd. His grades had mostly been BS, with a smattering of CS. He was a thin young man of average height, a couple inches short of 6 feet. He'd played high school soccer and volleyball, but he was no jock. Some girls thought him cute with his shaggy brown hair, hazel eyes, and light skin. But he didn't exude that air of confidence some guys had, and so most girls just didn't notice him. It hadn't been an easy spring for Brian. His average grades hadn't been enough to land a job in the tough economy. With each day he moved closer to the end of his time living in the dorms with his friends and closer to moving home with Mom. It was a future he didn't want to consider. Brian's mom wasn't mean or cold, on the contrary, she was just too loving. To her, Brian was still her baby boy, needing to be coddled and advised on every decision. His failure to secure a job had only reinforced her conviction that he needed her guidance. Meanwhile, without job prospects, Brian had lost all his ambition, and so rather than study for exams he now lazed on his back reading yet another dusty old novel he'd found in the expansive stacks of the college library. Rachel gave the young man a contemptuous look, glaring at him until he was forced to look up from his book. "What?" he asked. "You know what, Brian? How long are you going to play around reading trash when you should be studying?" Rachel demanded. Brian frowned and rolled his eyes. How could Rachel possibly have understood what he was going through? She was a successful young woman with excellent grades and a job waiting for her after graduation. Rachel had always been the studious type, serious and well-spoken. She'd been on student council in high school, captain of the college debate team. Brian knew it was never smart to get into an argument with her, but he just couldn't help himself this time. "It's Catcher in the Rye, Rachel, it's a frigging American classic. You can't call it trash." Rachel narrowed her piercing blue eyes and Brian knew he was in for it now. It wasn't just her intellect that shut down her opponents, it was her looks and her attitude. She was 5'7", wore her flowing blonde hair at shoulder length and regularly wore low-cut shirts to show off her sizable assets. Rachel knew what she had and she used it. "Don't give me that American classic bullshit," she snapped, calm but dismissive. "It's nothing but adolescent whining and vulgarity. Holden Caulfield is a spoiled little brat, and that's exactly why so many teens today identify with him. I mean, really, Brian, aren't you a bit old to be reading that stuff? I think we read it back in 10th grade. Whatever, Brian mumbled, knowing he'd lost before he'd even begun. Rachel smirked and returned to her chemistry text. She'd hardly settled back to her studies when the crack of a book snapping shut broke her concentration. Megan threw a heavy literature text to the ground in disdain while the other two looked curiously at her, Rachel with an air of annoyance. "This is hopeless." Megan sighed, defeated. "What is?" the other two chimed in at once. "The whole damn thing. I mean, how can I study on such a beautiful day? I know you have no problem with it, Ratch, but it does my head in. All I can think about is springtime in Paris and Rome, eating in sidewalk cafes and strolling along the Seine." "Ah, do we have to hear this again?" Brian grunted. Megan looked betrayed. "Can't you just be happy for me, for a moment?" "We get it, Megan, you're going to be traveling the world, escaping this awful, boring, pedestrian little backwater while we wallow in it. Have fun, sure, but stop rubbing our noses in it," Brian told her. Megan seemed to want to reply, but seeing she would get no help from Rachel, she swallowed her words, staring intently at a small bird hopping around the grass nearby. Megan was the least mature of the trio. Only 5'2" and with a cute face, she looked more like 17 than the 21 years she and the other two actually were. She still dressed like a teenager, not a young woman, still got roaring drunk at weekly parties. Megan had no interest in leaving college at all, certainly not in getting a real job, waking up before 10 a.m. and paying bills. How she'd managed to convince her mom to fund a trip around the world for her nobody knew. She'd probably just put on her perfect little princess act once again. In any case, she delayed her entrance to the real world for at least another year. After a couple minutes of awkward silence, it was Megan who hopped up and broke the tension. "Look, I'm gonna go play some frisbee instead of wasting this sunshine sitting in the shade. Either of you wanna join me?" "I'm good right here," Brian shrugged lazily. "Well, I have studying to do, and so do you," Rachel replied pointedly. "Fine then, do whatever you want. But I expect to see both of you at Brad's party tonight. Might be our last chance to really party before exams, you know." Brian and Rachel each gave her a tepid nod before she picked up her flip-flops and took off sprinting across the grass. The whole building seemed to vibrate from the noise of the party. Juniors and seniors mixed with the occasional underclassmen, drinking and yelling to each other over the boom of the pulsing music. At a table in the corner of the main room, several guys and a couple girls played kings. Already a couple looked like they might actually pass out. On the balcony, someone had broken out the heavier stuff and a gaggle of young revelers were gathered around a bong. Rachel and Brian weren't in the main party themselves though. They'd both slipped back to an adjoining bedroom to escape the deafening din. Brian sat on a messy couch, wedged between piles of dirty clothing abandoned there. He was still dressed in his typical college casual outfit of tight Abercrombie t-shirt, khakis, cargo shorts and flip-flops. Brian was in the process of downing his 5th or perhaps 6th beer of the night, he'd lost count. Rachel was wearing another one of her low-cut halter tops and some short shorts. She wasn't degrading herself by drinking beer, but she had polished off a few margaritas and a couple rum and cokes. Still, she seemed composed, in control, as she texted friends and checked her watch. The door to the bedroom swung open, the noise level trebling and making Rachel cover her ear. "Close it, will you?" she called over the roar. Megan stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. She looked a bit tipsy herself, her short black dress slightly askew. "Sorry about that," she giggled, smiling drunkenly. "Having fun?" Rachel asked wryly. "Sure. How about you guys?" "It's been a pretty good party, but it's getting late, Meg. I think I should be heading home." Megan looked scandalized. "You can't go. The party's barely started." "Sorry, Megan, but we can't party all night, you know. There are exams coming up," Rachel reminded her. "Oh yeah, fucking exams. God, am I tired of hearing about that. We can't all be perfect, you know, Ratch. We aren't all like you." Rachel frowned deeply. Had she been sober she probably would have just walked away, but though she didn't show it like Megan, Rachel was a bit drunk herself. "I'm not perfect, Meg, never said I was." Meg sneered. "Ha! Not perfect, good to know you can at least admit that. But we still have to keep hearing about that great job you landed, don't we? You complain about my trip, but you're just as bad with your bragging." For once Rachel looked at a loss for words. Her eyes fell to her feet for a moment while she struggled to respond. Finally she looked back at Megan and she seemed a changed woman, the veneer of confidence stripped away by alcohol and shame. "I'm sorry, Megan, I really am. I don't mean to brag. I just talk about it to reassure myself because I'm the one who's scared. I've never had a real job, Meg, I don't know the first thing about it. All I've ever been is a student, and it's all I've ever been good at. I can barely sleep at night because I keep thinking, what if I suck at it?" Megan stared at Rachel like she'd grown a second head. Never in all their years of friendship had Rachel admitted to such a lack of confidence in herself. It took a moment for Megan to process what she was hearing, then she decided to make an admission of her own. "I'm only going on this trip because I don't want to be an adult yet," she blurted out. Both Rachel and Brian smiled now. "What? Why you all smiling?" Megan asked. "We know," Brian piped up. "Everyone knows that about you. I mean, you don't exactly hide it, do you?" Drunk as she was, Megan just shrugged and chuckled in agreement. Then she noticed what Brian was doing on the couch. "Shit, dude, is that fucking book you've been reading? You actually brought it to a party." "Yeah, it's a good book, and it sounds like both of you could really appreciate it." "Rachel's right, man, that book is stupid," Megan told him. "Just some stupid whiny kid complaining about everything. Where the hell did you get it anyway? That thing looks ancient." Brian felt the black leather-bound book carefully in his hands, as though considering its age. "It was in the library, found it while I was looking through archaeology books, must have gotten misplaced somehow," he explained. "And anyway, it isn't just about some stupid teenager. Holden Caulfield is just like us. He's trapped between childhood and adulthood, unable to go back, but afraid to move forward." "Oh, come on, spare me. I've read the book too, you know," Rachel joined in. "Then you'll understand, Rach. Holden spends the whole book being disgusted by the adult world. When he's asked what job he wants most in the world, he says he wants to protect kids playing in a rye field from falling off the cliff at its edge. But it's all a metaphor. He wants to protect children's innocence, save them from the phony and morally corrupt world of adulthood, the cliff." The two girls considered this for a moment before Megan shook her head and rolled her eyes. Rachel just looked pensive. "I mean, think about it. Don't you find the adult world dirty and corrupt, filled with dangers and responsibilities?" "Well, of course," Rachel joined back in. "But there's nothing you can really do about it. That's why Catcher in the Rye is stupid, it's pure adolescent fantasy. You can't just stop time. You don't get to avoid adulthood. I mean, it doesn't turn out so well for Holden, does it? He ends up in a mental hospital in the end, doesn't he?" "That's not my point," Brian interjected. "I'm just saying it strikes a chord with me, and I think it does for you too. I'm willing to say it. I wish we didn't have to grow up. I don't want to be out on my own, no money, no job, having to make all new friends." And now Megan was nodding too. "I know, it really sucks," she sulked. Rachel shook her head at the pair of them. "Wish all you want, but that doesn't change facts. We're 21 years old, a good deal older than Holden in that story already. And at this age we are adults, we just have to accept it. Now I'm going to bed, and I suggest you two do the same." With that, Rachel gathered her handbag up and slipped out the door. Though she was the first to go, the others weren't far behind. Soon all three had climbed into their beds in their cluttered dorm rooms. Brian drifted off to sleep after pushing aside a pile of unwashed socks and underwear left on his bed, leaving his book discarded on the floor between pairs of sneakers and flip-flops. As he slept, the darkness of the room was disturbed by a glow from the old leather-bound book, as though it were irradiated. It glowed brighter and brighter until the whole room was lit by its flickering bluish hue. Then it flipped open, the pages fluttering back and forth like they were caught in a high wind. As Brian and all the others slept peacefully that night, the world began to shift around them. For Brian hadn't found that book in the library after all. It had found him. From the moment Brian began to creep towards awareness following morning, he knew that something was wrong. The pile of dirty underwear that had been pressed up against him was gone. As he swept his hand back and forth across the bed, he found nothing impeding it. What was more, the sheets felt different. Rather than the coarse, inexpensive sheets he'd bought for his dorm bed, he now felt soft, cozy flannel under his hand. Opening his eyes, Brian found himself staring up at a familiar and yet incredibly strange sight. It was the ceiling of his bedroom, but not his dorm bedroom. No, it was the ceiling of his bedroom back at home, and a dozen years ago. The white ceiling was covered in glow-in-the-dark star and moon stickers, just as it had been when he was a kid. By the time he was 10, he'd had his dad take them off because he was getting to be too big for silly little kid stickers. Yet there they were, perfectly intact. Looking down the covers at the end of his bed, Brian saw that a whole lot more than the ceiling was different. He wasn't in his dorm room anymore, that much was for sure. It was his bedroom, just as he remembered it from long ago. The walls were painted a light sky blue hue. The TV and PlayStation 3 that should have been at the end of his bed were missing, replaced by a big plastic toy chest. A big poster showing the constellations covered one section of wall, and pictures of planes and trains, his elementary school obsession, covered another. Sitting up in bed, Brian's hand brushed against something firm to the right of his head. It was a scruffy brown teddy bear, missing an eye and with a few little rips. He knew instantly that this was Buddy, his favorite stuffed animal from his childhood. He'd thrown poor Buddy away when he was 7 and had regretted it bitterly for a year afterwards at least. For a moment Brian felt a pang of deep guilt for throwing away his best childhood friend, and on impulse he grabbed the teddy tight and cuddled him tight in his arms, feeling the bear's soft material with his hands and almost muttering an apology to the long-lost old friend out loud. Hugging the teddy filled him with a sense of peace and safety such as he hadn't felt in years. It was like the bear was protecting him somehow, like nothing could hurt him as long as Buddy was here in his arms, soft fur nuzzling his cheek. Recovering his wits, Brian realized he needed to focus on what was happening to him. Putting Buddy aside, though careful to make sure he was seated comfortably against the pillow, Brian looked more closely at his room and saw that it wasn't exactly as he remembered it after all. The bed sheets were covered in Ben 10 decals, rather than the Thomas the Tank Engine designs he'd had when he was actually a little kid. His clothes had changed as well. His stylish t-shirt and shorts were gone. Now he wore a baggy white t-shirt emblazoned with SpongeBob's smiling face and no pants at all. Pulling back the t-shirt, he found he now wore white briefs with red piping and cartoon designs he didn't recognize. Brian's first thought was that he was still dreaming, but the more time passed the more real it all felt. He'd never had a dream that was anywhere near this lucid. That was when his heart rate started to pick up. At first glance, everything in this room looked like it belonged to a 5-year-old boy. But the more he looked, the more he realized that wasn't entirely right. While his bed was covered in kiddie designs, it still fit him perfectly. The childish t-shirt and underoos were snug and comfy on him. Surely they didn't make underoos like this for adults. No, everything in the room was designed for someone with the interests of a kindergartner but the body of an adult. That was what really frightened Brian most of all. Peeling back the covers, Brian swung his legs off the bed and placed his feet on the carpet, feeling its softness under his soles. Sure enough, his floor was covered in a wall-to-wall carpet, well worn from years of play, just as it had been until he was 13. Brian tiptoed around the room, afraid to make any noise, but needing to explore further. He found a bookshelf against the wall, but all the books were children's stories, filled with large print and lots of pictures. There were classics like The Little Engine That Could and newer ones based around Shrek and Cars, books which told him he had not been transported backwards in time. When he was actually 5, it was Lion King and Aladdin he was obsessed with. The real shock came when he opened the Shrek book. He looked down at the simple sentences written as block letters around colorful drawings and felt a sickening drop in his stomach. A wave of nausea rolled over him as he stared intently at the pages, as though that could solve the problem. But it was no use, no matter how long he stared, it didn't change the fact that he couldn't read. For a second he'd held out the faint hope that it was written in some foreign language he didn't know. It wasn't. He was able to recognize a couple words in the sentence after much struggling, though only the smallest and simplest words there. Despite the fact that he knew he was a college senior, Brian had to admit he was also now illiterate. Casting aside the book, Brian took to exploring the room further, hoping for some explanation. He was rummaging through the toy box when he heard footsteps approaching down the hallway. He froze where he was, unsure what to do. What on earth was going on here? "Brian, honey, wakey wakey," called a voice that Brian instantly recognized as being his mom's. He stared at the door in shock, heart pounding in his throat as he watched the knob turn. ***. Rachel was having a bad morning. She had gone to bed a dignified if slightly tipsy college girl, but had awoken to find herself in a room she hadn't seen since she was a little girl. After getting over her initial shock, she had quickly moved on to anger. Someone was playing a very nasty joke on her. Someone had clearly drugged her, brought her here and was trying to fuck with her head. Opening up her closet, she searched for something more appropriate to wear. She'd awoken, to her burning shame, in a pink frilly nightgown befitting a Barbie-obsessed little tyke. Unfortunately, whoever was pulling this prank on her was sparing no expense, because entire wardrobe in the closet was suited to a 5-year-old girl who had an adult body. There were princess dresses, t-shirts with Barbie designs, sweaters with knitted-on bunnies. Seeing this, Rachel had a much more disturbing thought. What if this wasn't a joke at all? What if she'd been kidnapped by some kind of nut? The more she thought about it, the more sense it made. Who would do all this for a laugh? No, she had to be in very serious trouble. She needed to think of an escape plan, and fast. But first she needed to get dressed in something. She settled on a pale pink sundress that was at least free of cartoon designs. Her massive collection of shoes was gone, of course, but there were several pairs to choose from. None were stylish, nothing with heels, of course. Little girls didn't wear heels. She settled for some simple flip-flops. Dressed as well as she could be, Rachel was ready to make her escape. She crept to the window but froze when she looked outside. It did indeed look just like the backyard of the house she'd grown up in. But how was that possible? She couldn't deny it though, this was definitely the exact view she'd looked out on year after year growing up here. She was back in her childhood home. At that moment, without warning, the door to the room clicked and swung open. Rachel spun on the spot and gasped in disbelief. Her mother was standing there in her pajamas, smiling, as though everything was as it should be. "Mom," Rachel squeaked. "Well, good morning, honey bun. I'm surprised to see you in here," her mom commented brightly. "What? Why?" Rachel asked, hoping her mom had some idea why everything in her room had changed to fit a little kid. "Well, usually when you're up before me you run downstairs to watch toons. What's so interesting outside that you'd rather look out the window than watch Bratz?" Now Rachel was doubly confused. Her mom was acting as if she was 5. Couldn't she see that Rachel was clearly a young woman? Had her mom lost her mind? "Mom, I don't watch cartoons, I'm an adult woman," she told her as seriously as she could given the way she was dressed. But her mother just shook her head and chuckled. "Oh Rachel, what an imagination you have. Maybe you've been watching a few too many cartoons, honey. Mom, for God's sake look at me. Can't you see I'm the same size as you? Can't you see I'm 21 years old? Rachel demanded, becoming hysterical. Honey, calm down, her mother soothed, stepping closer and running her hand through Rachel's hair. Of course I can see you're 21, honey, she assured. You can? Rachel asked desperately. Well, of course, silly Billy. I'm old but I'm not blind, you know, she joked. You're getting to be a big girl. Pretty soon you'll be going to all-day school and learning to read and write just like Mommy, she crooned, pulling Rachel into a hug. Rachel's eyes widened as he mother spoke. She tried to push away as he mom hugged her, horrified by what she was saying, but somehow unable to muster the strength to get away. It was as if her mom had become super strong, or she'd become very weak. Mom, I'm not a little girl. I can read and write on my own already. I'm in college, she insisted, her voice muffled as she was pulled tight against her mom's shoulder. Now Rachel, you shouldn't tell lies, you know that, her mom chided, slowly releasing her. But. No buts, young lady, it's time we get some breakfast in that tummy. We need to get you off to school on time. With that, her mom took her hand and led Rachel out of the room and down the hallway. It's so nice to see you got yourself dressed all on your own today, and in such a pretty outfit too, her mom praised. Now I just have to get your brother dressed, thank you for helping Mommy, honey. Had to get her brother dressed? What did that mean? Rachel's brother, Dan, was 18 and would be graduating high school in a couple months. Why would he need help getting dressed? Rachel now had to assume her mother had gone totally mad and was treating her and Dan like incompetent little children. Perhaps he'd have a better idea of how to deal with this situation. No sooner had she had this thought than Dan made his appearance, jumping out from the open doorway of his room, blocking their route. Rachel let out a little whimper of horror at what she saw. It was her teenage brother as she'd never seen him before. Like Rachel, his body was unchanged, but he too was dressed in childish attire, in fact the most childish outfit imaginable, his birthday suit. Whatever had happened to her, Dan was worse off by far, something had obviously happened to his mind. He was grinning ear to ear and giggling like an idiot, his hair wild and uncombed, hopping up and down bare naked before his mom and his sister, his penis bobbing and dangling about between his legs exposed to the world. Yet he clearly didn't care one little bit who saw him this way. Well, there's my little jaybird, their mom announced brightly. Danny wanna eat, the boy screeched loudly. Well, okay honey, but first we need to get you dressed, Mom told him. Danny pouted, sticking his upper lip out and shouting, no. Don't wanna. Rachel couldn't believe how ridiculous the pouting naked teen boy looked with his arms crossed, stamping his foot like a stubborn toddler. Oh, come on honey, don't you wanna get dressed like a big boy, Mom enticed. But Danny shook his head vigorously. Nah. Danny go naked. Well, okay then, but only dressed up big boys get peanut butter and jelly for breakfast, Mom told him, bargaining. Danny's look changed to one of deep desire. IWAN pea butter and Dewey, he demanded. Mom stepped forward and Rachel cringed as her mom tickled her teen brother's bare tummy, making him squirm and giggle. Well then, will you get dressed like a good boy so Mommy can fill up that tum-tum with pea band J? Aha! Danny squealed between giggles. Mom stopped her tickling and turned Danny towards the doorway, giving his bear but a gentle shove and directing, okay, scoot mister, Mommy will be right in to get you dressed. Then she turned to Rachel. Honey, please go downstairs for Mommy and take your seat at the table. I'll be down in a minute so we can eat and then get you to kindergarten so you can play with all your friends. Kindergarten? Rachel was too stunned to even speak anymore. So she simply turned and ambled down the stairs in a daze, wondering what had happened and whether it was she who had lost her mind. ***. Brian had always been his mom's little baby boy. No matter how big he got, she always treated him that way. So for him it wasn't as much of a shock when his mother came smiling into his bedroom and talked to him like a senseless little child. Furthermore, years of conditioning kicked in and Brian put up even less of a struggle than Rachel. In fact, he was still in shock, 2 days to fight back, to do anything but go with the flow. That was why he'd barely made a sound while his mom took him by the hand and led him down to the kitchen still dressed in his t-shirt and underoos alone. Mom looked at his frightened face with concern. "What's wrong, Brian? You can't go to school like what?" Brian gestured to his SpongeBob t-shirt, eyes wide, pleading for her to understand. "Like this. The way I'm dressed." Now she smiled again. "Don't be silly, Brian, you aren't going to school dressed like that. I wouldn't send you in your undies, you silly goose," she chided him. Brian relaxed a bit, but not entirely. Mom looked up at the clock again. "Oh my, we'd better get you dressed right now, honey, time is just flying by." Brian held out hope that this was all going to turn out to be some kind of joke. So he couldn't read and his mom was treating him like a little kid. Once he got out of this house, got back to campus, someone would be able to help him. It wasn't really logical, of course, but then nothing about the situation Brian found himself in was logical. In his fear, Brian had left his logic behind. Back up in his room, Brian stood idly chewing on his fingernails out of nervous habit while his mom picked out clothes from his closet. As she laid them out on the bed, Brian's nervous chewing only increased. Things were quickly going from bad to worse. "There we go," she announced brightly once the whole outfit was set out before him. Brian looked from the outfit to her smiling face and back again. He didn't want to upset her, a big part of him wanted to be a good boy for her, in fact. Yet he couldn't just accept such an outfit. His mom had chosen a blue and red Spider-Man t-shirt that no doubt any 5-year-old would have considered the height of cool. To go with that was a pair of jean shorts with an elastic waist and worst of all a pair of white Velcro sneakers. "Please, Mom, can't I pick something to wear?" he begged. "We don't have time, Brian, now get your butt over here so we can get you dressed. You want to see all your friends, don't you?" "No," Brian screeched. He didn't want to see anyone he knew dressed in that get-up. "Don't be silly. Now come over here or there will be consequences, young man," Mom ordered, her voice going suddenly stern. Brian pouted but nonetheless found himself creeping closer to her in obedience. He didn't know why, but the need to be good for his mom seemed to be overwhelming. It was almost a physical urge, it was so strong. He seemed unable to resist as she lifted his hands in the air and slicked the t-shirt off his head. A second later he felt the cotton material of the new shirt brush over his face, his world going all blue for a second. Soon she had his shorts pulled up and he saw to his shame that they fell well above his knees, like no self-respecting teen or young man would allow. Then came the socks. They were white tube socks that came all the way up to calf length when Mom pulled them up. With the Velcro sneakers added to the mix, Brian had never felt so stupid in his life. Every step of the way Brian wanted to rebel, to run away. He was dressed, he had shoes on, he could have escaped. But to where? He looked like a special needs boy dressed this way. So he continued on his illogical mission to let his mom take him to college, dressed like a preschooler, so that he could find his friends and they could help figure out what was wrong with him. Brian was convinced by now that this was all due to something his mom had done. He just had to play along until she left him at school, then he'd be free. So he followed her down to the kitchen, where she packed a lunch for him and placed it in a bright blue plastic backpack covered in Thomas the Tank Engine designs. Seeing the backpack gave Brian conflicting feelings. He had to cringe at the idea of wearing such a childish accessory, but at the same time he felt a flutter of excitement. He really did love trains after all, had since he was very little. He had vivid memories of whole afternoons spent lying on the carpeted floor pushing his Thomas trains around as a boy. "Okay," Mom declared, taking his hand again. "Let's get going, buddy." Brian let her lead him out to the car, feeling certain everyone in the neighborhood had to be staring at him right now. He prayed no cars would go by, no joggers run past until he was safely hidden in the car. Keeping his eyes on his feet out of shame, Brian didn't even notice Mom was leading him to the back seat until she'd opened the door. To his surprise, a large booster seat, big enough to accommodate an adult, sat in the right back seat. "Hop in," Mom cheerfully directed. Brian climbed into the seat, finding how it sat him higher in the car than he was used to very strange. Despite his adult size, the raised seat meant his feet didn't quite reach the floor. Only his toes brushed it as his feet dangled. Mom leant over him and did his seatbelt up for him, then got in the front and buckled herself in, smiling at him in the mirror. As the Subaru station wagon cruised slowly through the residential streets of their suburban neighborhood, Brian got his first inkling that the changes he'd been through might not be unique. As they waited at a four-way stop, he noticed a 30-something woman pushing a stroller along the sidewalk. The stroller seemed much too large, and a quick glance at the occupant revealed why. A boy of about 12 was sat in the stroller. He was dressed in nothing but a large and puffy white diaper, sucking on a big red pacifier and grabbing at his wiggling bare toes with a look of innocent curiosity in his eyes. Brian only had a second to stare at the boy in wonder before the car lurched forward through the intersection. It was possible the boy was just mentally challenged, of course, but then what mother took a kid like that out in public in nothing but a diaper? Brian began looking intently out the window at the passing houses, looking for something else out of place. It didn't take long to find something. Brian's eyes went as wide as saucers as they passed a small brown split level a couple blocks from his house. Right there in the front yard was a rather large kiddie pool, and standing in it was a teen girl perhaps a few years younger than himself. She was standing in the pool naked but for a pink and white swim diaper and a pair of bright orange floaties on her arms. Her pert bare breasts, dripping with pool water, were exposed to every passing car while she stood there and flapped her arms, grinning like a cheerful idiot at all the passing traffic getting a free peep show. As the drive to school continued, Brian grew more and more certain that the whole world had gone mad. A young man who looked perhaps mid-20s was riding a bike down the sidewalk, nothing unusual about that at first glance. But the bike he was riding was no 10-speed mountain bike or thin-tired racer. It looked like a simple kid's bike complete with playing cards hitting the tires to make a motor noise. The man was shirtless and barefoot, his long toes gripping the bright green plastic pedals, ratty cut-off jean shorts hanging below his knees. There were more teens in strollers, riding tricycles, 20-somethings walking along holding parents' hands. Brian was so rapt watching the houses go by he didn't even pay attention to where they were headed. It was only when they pulled up in front of a squat brick building with a basketball court and playground out front did he realize they were at the local elementary school, not the college campus. "Here we are," Mom announced, putting the car in park. The young man wasn't listening, he was watching the kids on the playground. 20-somethings ran this way and that, helter-skelter across the tarmac. There were big hulking men wearing Pokemon t-shirts and shorts, sneakers with flashing lights and Velcro instead of laces. There were beautiful young women too, wearing shortals, hair in pigtails, jumping rope and playing hopscotch. Brian understood now that there would be no escape from his mom. It wasn't just him, it wasn't just his house. The world had turned upside down. Kindergarten. Rachel hadn't noticed the changes in the neighborhood. As she rode to school, her thoughts were still focused on what had happened 20 minutes ago in the kitchen. She'd been sitting in her seat at the table while her mom dealt with her little brother. Danny had gotten dressed by then, wearing a simple red t-shirt with white stripes and a big pull-up with yellow stars and all. It looked ridiculous on the grown teenager as he squatted on his seat, toes wrapped over the edge while Mom tried to clean off his milk mustache. It was then that Rachel had looked over at the cereal box on the table. She wondered what strange foreign brand it was. She looked closer, noticing it was clearly a box of Rice Krispies. Rachel's eyes went back to the label, it was indecipherable. That was the moment when she realized she couldn't read. Even as the car rumbled along the suburban streets, Rachel couldn't get over the loss of her reading ability. She always had taken such great pride in her intelligence, her superiority as a student. Now she couldn't even read. Changes to the rest of the world were inconsequential when something so horrible had happened to her. Her mother dropped Danny off at daycare first, lifting him out of his big car seat and setting him down on the pavement outside. Rachel only glanced over at the daycare building. She could see other teens playing in the front yard, but she wasn't interested in that. Mom was telling Danny to say goodbye to his big sister. He waved a silly little kid wave at her, flexing his fingers up and down and yelling bye-bye to her. Rachel gave him a slight nod, noting that Mom had at least slipped a pair of shorts over his silly pull-ups, even if she hadn't bothered to put shoes on his feet. The door slammed shut and Mom hopped back in the driver's seat after handing off Danny to an attendant. Then they were back on their way to kindergarten. With a glossy Barbie backpack swung over her shoulder, Rachel edged her way across the playground in front of the elementary school. Her simple plastic and rubber flip-flops scraped across the blacktop and she tried to keep her eyes focused on them and not on the swarming hordes of oversized children. Most of them were older than her, the oldest appearing to be close to 30 but dressed like preteens. She spotted a group of kids who appeared to be college-aged playing on a jungle gym amidst the woodchip-covered playground area. One girl was hanging upside down from the metal bars, her skirt flopping down to reveal her pink panties to everyone, though she didn't seem at all bothered. A handsome young man beside her was dressed in corduroy overalls, picking his nose and making no attempt to conceal it. Rachel had no intention of approaching those nose-picking, dirty adult-sized kids. Clearly they weren't like her. She may have lost her reading, but she still had her mind. Just as she was about to leave the playground, she spotted someone familiar. Sitting crouched on the ground beneath the jungle gym was Brian. He was dressed as goofy as any of the big kids here, but from the way he was hiding and the desperate look in his eyes, Rachel guessed he was feeling like her. At least she hoped that was the case. She didn't know what she'd do without at least one friend to commiserate with. "Brian," she called, rushing over and dropping to her knees in the woodchips before him. Immediately she saw the relief in his eyes and knew she wasn't alone. "Rachel? You remember me?" Brian asked, sounding greatly relieved. "How could I forget you?" she exclaimed. "You're the only person I've met yet who isn't acting like a dumb little kid. I know, it's like the whole damned world has changed. Everyone thinks we're 5 years old again." "No, it's worse than that, Brian." "Worse than that? What do you mean?" "My mom knew I'm 21. But she thought it was normal for me to go to kindergarten. It's like our whole reality has been altered and now it's normal to go through developmental stages at much later ages," Rachel explained. Brian nodded in agreement. "That makes sense to me. I mean, it doesn't make normal sense, but I think you're right. This whole thing is messed up." "You're telling me?" "Brian, you didn't see my little brother. You remember Dan?" Brian nodded. "Yeah, of course I remember him. He was always trying to tag along with us when we were kids. Well, he was running around the house buck naked this morning, refusing to get dressed. And right now he's at a daycare center and wearing a fucking pull-up," she exclaimed. "He was naked? Ah, that's awful. And Mom seemed to think that was normal too. He's 18 but he acted like he was 2, maybe 3 at best." Brian looked around the playground and shook his head. "Rachel, you and I can still think like normal. But why do you think that is? I mean, why are we still able to sit here talking while all our old friends eat their boogers and play in the dirt?" "Our old friends?" "Yeah, didn't you notice?" Brian asked, pointing around at other young people on the playground. "Most of these guys and girls are from college. A lot of them went to high school with us too." Rachel looked at the kids around her more carefully. It dawned on her that Brian was right. The nose-picking guy was in her chemistry class. The upside-down girl had been one of the popular girls in high school. In fact, she knew pretty much all of these kids. Brian was right too, they were the only two here who weren't acting like dumb little brats. "I dunno, Brian, it's pretty weird, isn't it?" she agreed. More than weird, Ratch. I think it means all of this has something to do with us. Before she could comment further, a loud bell rang and children began to hop off play equipment, climb out of sandpits and hurry over towards the front doors of the building. We better go too, Brian suggested, standing up and brushing the wood chips off. Rachel nodded and followed him towards the growing lines of kids. It seemed they lined up by grade. In a normal school it would have been easy to tell 6th graders from kindergartners by height. Here though they had to judge by clothing and behavior, as pretty much everyone was in their 20s. They headed for the line of kids in overalls and skirts squirming about, unable to stand still. They had just fallen in at the end of the line when another girl with a familiar face bumped right into them. Megan looked cuter and more immature than ever, with her hair tied in pigtails with pretty pink bows. She wore a frilly purple short-sleeve shirt under hot pink shortalls, with a pair of purple Dora the Explorer sandals completing the outfit. For a moment Brian and Rachel were each certain that Megan would soon give them a silly grin and start picking her nose or doing something else childish. She just really looked like an overgrown 5-year-old. But as soon as she recognized them, Megan yelled, "Oh my God, I'm glad to see you guys." "Megan, you've got your mind," Rachel blurted out, perhaps sounding a tad too shocked. Megan frowned at her. "Of course I do, why is that so surprising?" "Well, look around you," Rachel declared, trying to cover up her faux pas. "Oh, right," Megan agreed. Brian nodded at her sadly. He had never seen Megan look so uncomfortable and unhappy. She was always the cheerful party girl of the group, but this change seemed to have hit her pretty hard. "You doing okay, Meg?" he asked with concern. She nodded feebly. "Everyone has been treating me like a little kid all morning, but I guess we're actually pretty lucky. My little sister, Sue, has it so much worse." "How do you mean? Is she like a toddler?" Rachel asked. Megan shook her head. "Worse. She's like an infant, a big overgrown baby. And she's not like us guys, she hasn't got a fucking clue. She's 15 years old, but she looks happy as could be, creeping around the house in nothing but a big droopy, stinky diaper, chewing at her hair and drooling all over herself." All three stared at each other in shock. Nobody seemed able to even reply to offer some comforting words to Megan. What could they say after all? The piercing whine of a whistle broke them out of their funk, all three looking at the front of the building where several older adults had appeared. A woman in a long red dress was blowing the whistle, calling all the children to attention. Once there was relative silence, the teachers began taking the classes line by line. A kindly-looking woman in a fuzzy knitted sweater and a long dotted skirt stood before their line, smiling cheerfully at them. With a little wave she urged them forward, and the trio found themselves walking silently through the hallways of the school. The classroom they were led to was clearly the kindergarten. It had a faded red carpeted floor, well worn from years of kids playing on it. At the center of the room were several large tables with plastic kiddie-style chairs sat around them. In the corner was a pile of mats, probably for napping on. One wall was decorated in big letters, going from A to Z in order across the wall, each with a little picture of some object that matched the letter. A had a big red apple drawn next to it, B a yellow school bus, and so on. The other wall was lined with cubbies, each with a laminated yellow name tag on it. Beside that was a very large toy chest overflowing with toys. The children raced over to the cubbies, stuffing backpacks and lunchboxes in them. Sure enough, the trio all found ones with their names and dutifully put away their backpacks before heading for the tables. They chose one that still had 3 open seats before sitting together. Though the chairs were brightly colored plastic and looked like they should be tiny things for kids, they were actually normal-sized. They had hoped to have some time to scheme and think up ways to fix their situations, but the teacher, Miss Henshaw, ruined that by repeatedly checking to make sure they were making progress on their work. That was what she called it, at least. The day began with simple coloring. At first Rachel had rolled her eyes as she watched the other 2 children at their table, a red-headed girl with pigtails and the booger-eating boy from the playground, make messy scribbles with little attempt to stay within the lines. Then she discovered that it was harder than she thought. Her fingers weren't coordinated properly. It was as though she were very drunk. It took all her concentration to stay, mostly, within the lines. Brian and Megan didn't even try. They quickly found that it was pointless, and in any case there was a feeling of freedom and relaxation they got from scribbling the crayons this way, and that without worrying much about lines. After coloring came snack time, and each kid was given a carton of milk. Brian found himself wishing it was chocolate milk, then pushed aside the errant thought, reminding himself how degrading this all was. Just as he thought that, he noticed the boog eater was blowing bubbles in his milk with his straw. The ginger pigtailed girl was laughing her head off at his antics. Brian watched the boy blowing bubbles and felt a strange curiosity roll over him. Experimentally, he blew air into his straw. His milk bubbled in a strangely satisfying way. Brian couldn't help but let out a giggle. He blew more, making bigger and bigger bubbles. This was pretty fun. "Brian, stop playing with your food. Show me you can eat like a big boy," the teacher reprimanded, having appeared behind Brian while he was distracted with his bubble blowing. Brian was sure he turned as red as a cherry. He couldn't believe he'd just been told off for playing with his food like a dumb little kid. At least snack time didn't last long. Soon it was time for some proper lessons. Miss Henshaw called all the children over to a corner of the room where they had to sit on their butts on the floor. Brian always hated that when he was a kid, and now he recalled why. There was no way to get comfortable on the floor. He tried Indian style, then sitting with his legs under him, then with legs stretched out. None of those positions was comfortable for long. Meanwhile, the teacher got to sit in a nice comfy chair. Miss Henshaw hushed the children and pulled out a pack of bid cards. "Okay children, now we're going to practice our letters. I'll show the card and call on one of you to tell me what letter it is. The rest of you have to be quiet though. If you can stay quiet for me, everyone will get another star on their charts." The teacher began to flip the cards up, calling on the eager children one at a time. Seeing their former lab partners and prom dates hopping on their butts and stretching out their hands to identify letters of the alphabet made Brian, Megan, and Rachel all share a collective groan. "Rachel," Miss Henshaw called, looking down at the girl. Rachel looked up, stunned. All eyes were on her now, and she actually felt fear. Miss Henshaw was giving her an encouraging smile. "Come on Rachel, you know what letter this is, don't you?" Rachel looked at the letter on the card and felt a bit sick. What letter was that? It was so familiar, and yet she couldn't quite seem to name it. How was that even possible? She was grasping at straws, determined not to look like a fool in front of her friends, in front of this gaggle of stupid brats. Finally the name of the letter flashed into her mind, just as it looked like Miss Henshaw was about to call on someone else. "Ah," she blurted out. "It's an R." Rachel felt so relieved and proud for recognizing the letter. Or at least she did, until Miss Henshaw frowned slightly and gave a little shake of her head. "Sorry dear, not quite," she said. Rachel felt like she'd been kicked in the stomach. Tears welled up in her eyes as she sat there stunned by her failure. Miss Henshaw pointed to a dumb-looking 20-year-old named Becky who was busy sucking her thumb until a second ago. "That's a F," Becky eagerly yelled out. "Very good, Becky," Miss Henshaw praised, while the girl beamed and returned her thumb to her mouth. Of course it was an F. How could she have been so stupid? Rachel recalled that as a little girl she'd always had trouble with those two letters for some reason. They didn't even look similar though. Now she'd been one-upped by a girl so dumb and juvenile she couldn't stop sucking her thumb. It was beyond embarrassing, it was humiliating. Rachel felt salty tears tracing their way down her cheeks, and she forced her head into her drawn-up knees to hide her shame. Since kindergarten worked on a half-day schedule, it mercifully came to an end not much later. After enduring Miss Henshaw's reading from Winnie the Pooh, they were told they could have free playtime until their moms or dads arrived to take them. Brian and Megan made their way over to the toy box dutifully while Rachel just sat by herself in the corner and sulked. At first Brian was sure the toys would be stupid kid stuff that he'd have no interest in, but then he found there were several Thomas trains. They were brightly painted and appealing. They even had coaches that linked up to them. He hesitated to touch them at first. After all, why would he actually want to play with such silly toys? But then another boy grabbed Percy and James and ran off with them. Brian instantly felt a pang of jealousy. He wanted James. That was always his favorite character. Brian gave in and grabbed Henry and Gordon toys from the chest. In moments he had Henry's green plastic body attached to a line of red and white coaches and Gordon's longer blue form linked to several boxcars. He lied down on the carpet on his tummy, swinging his legs automatically in the air above him, and began to push them towards each other. Without really thinking about it, Brian began to make chugging sounds, quietly at first, but then louder. What did it matter if others heard him? They were all dumb kids anyway. Brian ran the two trains towards each other, imagining the spectacular crash that was coming and beginning to imitate Gordon and Henry's voices. The two toy trains smashed into each other, creating a satisfying wreck of coaches and boxcars. Brian grinned and made all sorts of smashing and crashing noises, giggling to himself at the fun of it all. "What the hell are you doing?" Brian stopped his giggling and looked up at Rachel, feeling immediately ashamed. I was just, he stammered. "You were playing like a little kid. Is this what you want, Brian? Did you make this happen to us, so you could play with kids' toys?" she accused. "What? No. Of course I didn't cause this, how could I? It just, I dunno, felt right." He's right. They both looked over to see Megan standing there with a Barbie doll in one hand and a toy brush in the other. "I was just playing with my Barbie, brushing her hair. And, well, it felt right. It was fun." Rachel frowned again, her cheeks still red from tears, her eyes still bloodshot. "What are we going to do?" Brian put the toy trains down, feeling funny about playing with them now. "I'll tell you what we can't do," he spoke up. "We can't get separated again. We need to stick together, guys." "How do we do that, Brian?" Rachel asked. "We're little kids now. Our moms will be here soon to take us home for damned naps or something. We could ask to have a play date," Megan suggested. "What?" "You know, a play date. My little cousins have them with friends from preschool all the time. It gives the moms a chance to spend time with other grown-ups too. We should convince our moms to let us all play this afternoon. Then maybe we can figure out a way to fix this." Brian and Rachel considered Megan's suggestion, then they both nodded in agreement. When Megan's mom turned up a few minutes later, the girl put on a convincing act. Mommy, I wanna play with my friends today," she announced, hopping up and down like a hyperactive little kid. "Please. Can I go over their house and play?" To Brian and Rachel's surprise, the little kid act worked like a charm. Megan's mom just couldn't say no to the eager little girl. So they swallowed their pride and repeated the act for their moms. Brian had the toughest job because they decided his place would be the best location to go to as he was an only child. He had to convince his mom to have them all back. In the end, though, it turned out to be a piece of cake. All the moms were eager for their children to make friends, or maybe just for the chance to socialize with other moms. Either way, the trio was soon gathered at Brian's house. The moms placed the kids in the backyard to play while they had tea in the kitchen. Of course, that allowed them to watch the children closely through a sliding glass door, just in case they got into any trouble. The backyard was no exception to the transformations the world had gone through. A plastic play place with a little ladder and yellow slides sat in the middle of the lawn. Along the side was a swing set with an attached slide of its own. Just beside that was a small sandbox shaped like a turtle. The lawn showed all the signs of belonging to a family with a growing little boy. The newish swing set had replaced the plastic play place as the boy reached big boy kindergarten age. The three friends headed as far away from their moms as they could, settling on their bottoms in the grass along the far fence. Brian and Rachel hadn't even bothered to remove their backpacks and now dropped the bright cartoon bags beside them. "So, what's the plan?" Megan asked Rachel as soon as they'd Saturday. "What plan? Why are you asking me?" she retorted. "Well, I dunno, Rach, maybe because you're always the one with a plan," Megan huffed. "Well, I'm sorry if having my whole reality change overnight has thrown me off my game a bit. I mean, I can't even read. No, worse, I can't even recognize the alphabet. How do you expect me to come up with a plan to fix that?" Okay, we need to stay calm," Brian reminded them. "Now I don't know how this happened, but the only thing we can do right now is accept it and try to go with the flow." "You go with the flow, I've had it with being treated like a kid," Rachel snapped. "I'm tired, I'm dressed like an idiot and I'm hungry. But if I go in there and ask for something to eat, all I'll get is fussed over and fed like a baby." "Well, maybe there's something in here we can eat," Brian suggested, opening the zipper of his Thomas the Tank Engine backpack. Brian rummaged through the pack, finding only crayons, a coloring book and a leather-bound copy of Catcher in the Rye. All three gasped as the book fell onto the grass. Brian picked it up tentatively, as though it might burn him. He felt the leather in his hands, looked over the worn book. It was completely unchanged. "What is that doing here?" Rachel demanded. "I didn't put it in there. I swear I haven't seen this since last night," he insisted. "So it just packed itself in your backpack all on its own then?" Rachel scoffed. "Maybe it did," Megan interrupted ominously. They all exchanged wary looks before their eyes returned to the book. "Do you think," Brian stammered, "do you think it could have caused this? How could a book do this? How could anything or anyone do this? I think we are beyond the realm of the normal here. And this is the only constant between last night and today that I've seen yet," Brian answered. "Where did it come from anyway? You're sure you found it in the library, Brian?" Brian looked guilty, his eyes on the grass as the girls stared. "Well, Brian, I did find it in the library. But, when I looked in the back, it didn't have a library card or a barcode or anything. So I just took it," he admitted. "Well, that's just great. A book has ruined our lives, that makes this all so much better, knowing what caused it," Rachel mocked sarcastically. "We should destroy it," Megan breathed. "No, that could make things worse," Brian said. "Worse? How?" "I mean, so the book is all about how much adulthood sucks and how great being a kid is, right? So now it changed us into little kids, saved us from adulthood. Well, I've got news for it. Being a kid sucks. I hate this," Rachel roared. "We all hate this, Rach," Brian reminded her. "None of us likes being kindergartners, for God's sake." Brian had barely spoken the words when he let loose a horrified yelp and threw the book on the grass between them. "What?" the girls shouted. Brian looked at them with terror in his eyes. The color had drained from his face. It was like something inside kicked at the cover, trying to get out. "Not again." 3 sets of eyes locked on the book, watching as it began to vibrate on the ground. Then an eerie green glow began to emanate from the cover. No one spoke a word as the book cover flew open as though caught by a gust, despite the air's unnatural stillness. The pages fluttered back and forth and all around them the world began to change. The swing set vanished into thin air while the play place in the middle of the yard grew brighter, newer. The sandbox moved from the edge of the yard to the middle, pails and plastic shovels and toys appearing in it and around it. A shiny red tricycle now sat next to the back deck. Beside it was a toy lawn mower. Then the changes began to affect the kids themselves. Rachel's sundress began to change, becoming pink, its hem rising higher and higher up her legs. A blast of wind seemed to whip her hair about until it settled in pigtails with pink bows on each. Her flip-flops vanished completely. Megan's pink shortballs didn't change, but the shirt underneath them changed until it sported the smiling face of Elmo from Sesame Street. Her Dora the Explorer sandals vanished the same as Rachel's had. Brian watched these changes happen before it began to affect him as well. His shorts began to lengthen, the cargo pockets disappearing. The elastic waist disappeared as the jeans began climbing upward as well. His Spider-Man t-shirt faded to a light baby blue, the cartoon motif changing to Winnie the Pooh. Soon it was mostly covered by his new overalls. As the legs lengthened, his tube socks receded down his legs ahead of the cuffs. The overall cuffs stopped just above his ankles, rolling themselves up to keep from getting dirty. His socks disappeared into the Velcro sneakers, then with a pop both disappeared, leaving him barefoot too. As quickly as it began it ended. The book slammed itself shut and the breeze picked up again. The three kids looked each other over and knew that things had indeed just gotten worse. Brian was staring particularly hard at Rachel, specifically at the hem of her dress. What? All this stupid stuff happening and you gotta look up my dress? No, it's not that. It's just your dress is really short. I know it is. I didn't choose it, you dum-dum. No, I mean, I can see your underwear. And, well, it looks kind of thick. Rachel's eyes widened and she pulled up her dress, revealing white pull-ups with little pink star designs. Oh my gosh. I don't need those, she yelled in horror. Brian felt around his own crotch. Sure enough, it felt a bit too padded down there on him as well. He pulled back the bib of his new Oshkosh overalls and slipped a hand down his pants. He felt the waist of the pull-ups between his fingers. There was no more doubt he wasn't in big boy pants anymore. As he withdrew his arm, he found something else. His skin was smooth, too smooth. In fact, all the hair on his arms and legs was gone. He felt his chin and cheeks, no stubble, smooth as could be. He feared that he'd even lost his hair in a more intimate area, but was too afraid to check. Brian looked up at the pained expressions Rachel and Megan wore. I'm in pull-ups too, he admitted sullenly. What happened? Megan whispered, her voice shaky. I think we just got younger, Brian replied. They all turned their heads towards the house as they heard the back door slide open. Kids, you know not to play out there by the fence. Brian's mom yelled to them as she strode across the lawn towards them. She didn't look any different from before, but the way she was looking at them had changed. It wasn't something that could really be measured, but they all shared the sense that she didn't see them as kindergartners anymore. When she reached them, she bent over without another word and slipped her hands under Brian's armpits. He was so shocked by the sudden invasion of his personal space that he didn't have time to react. With incredible strength, she lifted him to his feet, even though he was fully 4 inches taller than her. Okay, little boy, you get your butt over to your play area right now, she scolded, giving him a gentle pat on his bottom to send him on his way. Brian padded barefoot through the grass without a word, too overwhelmed by the fact his mom had just manhandled him so easily to respond. Meanwhile, she placed her hands on her hips and gave the girls a stern motherly look. Let's go, Rachel. Megan. Scoot. The girls did as they were told. They could see there was no room for argument. They stood and followed Brian back to the bright plastic play place, watching him climb into one of the holes and disappear inside. Only then did it occur to Rachel and Megan that they'd left the most important book in the world sitting back in the grass with the bags. Unfortunately, it was too late to go back now. They'd just have to wait until the adults weren't looking to go back for it. As they got closer to the play place, they realized it was surprisingly big. It was clearly built for people their size. The slide reached over their heads in height, and climbing up the pink ladder on the side actually looked tricky. Rachel and Megan hesitated, wondering what to do. Brian's mom was still standing there waiting for them to start playing. Come on guys, it isn't so bad. Brian's voice called out. The girls looked around and then up, realizing he was now standing atop the play place smiling down at them. "It's huge," he enthused. "Yeah, I noticed," Megan agreed, feeling the plastic ladder rungs experimentally. "Come on, don't be a scaredy cat." Brian chuckled. The girls shared a skeptical look. How on earth could he actually be having fun after what had just happened to them? Still, Megan at least decided it was worth a try, and besides, his mom wasn't going to go away until she saw them all engaged in silly kid games. So she slipped a bare foot onto the plastic ladder and started climbing. Brian was waiting for her at the top, still smiling. "Look," he told her. She gazed around and was amazed at how high up she felt. "This is pretty fun," she admitted. "Come on, let's slide," Brian urged, taking her by the hand. It was an amazing feeling, sliding. The smooth plastic rushing past across her calves, the air rushing over her face, the sensation of speed and falling. It ended with a sharp drop onto the tickly grass and the gleeful screech of Brian as he barreled into her. It was addictive. Rachel couldn't resist long, and soon all three had forgotten their other troubles, reveling in their play world. There was no organization to it as there had been at kindergarten. They didn't play any particular games, just climbed and slid and tumbled about in the grass. They had lost all sense of time when Megan froze midway up the ladder and gasped, looking horrified by something. Rachel, waiting her turn to climb, got annoyed at her friend hogging the ladder. "Come on, Meg. Get a move on." Megan didn't move an inch. She took a hand off the top rung and felt her crotch, letting out a low moan. Rachel recognized now that something was wrong. "Meg, are you okay?" she asked, concerned. "No," Megan squeaked meekly, still not budging. "What is it?" Brian asked, appearing from the other side. "I dunno." "Something's wrong with Meg," Rachel told him. Megan slowly, cautiously, climbed off the play place, her bare feet turning inward as they settled in the grass, toes pointed together. Slowly she turned to face them, now grasping at her crotch with both hands. Her face was red with shame and she wouldn't make eye contact with them. "What is it, Meg? You need the bathroom?" Brian asked. She shook her head and closed her eyes tightly. "No, I don't need the bathroom." "Not anymore." Brian and Rachel shared a concerned look. "You mean?" Brian began, letting the rest of the question hang in the air. Megan nodded. "Yes. I went pee-pee in my pants," she sobbed, tears running down her cheeks. Rachel stood frozen where she was, a look of revulsion on her face. Brian recovered more quickly, reaching in and putting a hand on Megan's shoulder. "It's okay, Meg, I'm sure your mommy will clean it up." Meg sobbed and hiccuped all the more. I didn't even feel it. I just tinkled myself and I didn't even know it till I felt my pull-ups get all soggy." "Let's just get you to your mommy, okay?" Brian repeated, taking Megan's hand and leading her towards the house. As they trod towards the house, Megan's mom appeared and quickly headed towards her crying daughter. Her mom was a bigger woman than the other moms, overweight and frumpy. She had a look of deep concern on her face as she met them. "What is it, sweetie pie?" "What's wrong?" she crooned, stroking the girl's tear-stained cheek. "I had an accident," she sobbed. "Oh honey," the rotund mom crooned, wrapping her arms around her daughter and cuddling her close. "It's okay, Meggie, mommy will get you all cleaned up and dry in no time," she assured, rubbing Megan's back. "But, I didn't even feel it happen, mommy. I'm supposed to be a grown-up, not a baby." "Oh Meggie, you're not a baby. Lots of girls your age have accidents now and then. You're only 21 after all. You'll get the hang of it soon enough, I promise." Megan sniffled and stopped crying, feeling somehow comforted by her mother's presence if not her words. "Everything all right, Amanda?" Brian's mom asked, emerging from the doorway. "Yes, Sarah, it'll be fine, little Meggie just had an accident, that's all." "Oh, poor dear." Was it just a pee-pee accident? Well, she's not too stinky, Amanda replied, making her daughter blush again. Honey, did you make any poo-pee, or just tinkles? Megan's lip quivered in shame as she shook her head vigorously and declared, just tinkles, Mommy. Well, that's not so bad, Sarah told the distraught girl. My little guy still tinkles in his pull-ups more often than the potty, she told her, gesturing to Brian. Now it was Brian's turn to burn bright red in shame. Mommy, he called, willing her to stop. Oh, hush, silly, she replied. In fact, as long as you have to change Megan, we might as well get Brian and Rachel on the potty before they need to be changed too, Sarah added. I don't need to pee-pee. Brian yelled, feeling ever more frustrated by being talked down to like this by a woman who was shorter than him. Well, if you keep up that yelling, I think you'll need to take a nap, Sarah warned him. Then she turned to Amanda and remarked, he always gets fussy when he needs his nap. If he misses his nap, I've got a surefire temper tantrum on my hands. Oh, I know exactly what you mean, Amanda agreed. You should have seen it the time Meggie went off at the supermarket. She can really make a scene when she gets cranky. Do I hear temper tantrum stories being told? Rachel's mom asked as she joined them outside, a cup of tea in her hand. Yes, Joy, but they can wait for now. We really need to change poor Meg's pull-up, Sarah told her. Okay, let's go, little princess, Amanda chirped, scooping up the college girl and carrying her into the house, her bottom resting on the mom's arm. Brian followed them into the house while Joy walked out into the yard to retrieve her daughter as well. The kitchen had changed since they were last in it a few minutes earlier. The white refrigerator was covered in pieces of paper covered in childish crayon scribbling. There were baby locks on all the bottom cabinets, and a red fire engine designed booster seat sat in one of the kitchen chairs. Heading into the living room revealed even more changes. The toy box that had been there before had disappeared. Gone was the little rug designed to look like a city street plan, and with it all the Tonka trucks and toy cars. The Lego set was nowhere to be seen, the Mr. Potato Head and radio-controlled car vanished. Instead, their big letter blocks and shapes. A colorful xylophone sat abandoned in the middle of the room, and beside it Buddy, his teddy bear. Although Buddy was now looking a lot newer and nicer than he had earlier. His fur was lighter and cleaner at least. In the corner was a toy vacuum cleaner, and against the wall a whole toy kitchen set. Everything was bright and colorful. Nothing was small enough for a stupid toddler to choke on. Brian stopped in the middle of the room and wiggled his toes in the plush cream carpet as Amanda laid out a mat on the floor and then beckoned Meg to lie down on it. She stood stock still and shook her head. Come on, Meggie, you don't want to stay in that wet pull-up, do you? Be a good girl for Mommy and lie down. No, I don't want to do it like this. Please, I'm not a baby. Megan begged. Oh, I see, you want to stand up like a big girl. Is that it, honey? Amanda asked, not waiting for an answer before she took Megan's hand and pulled her to the middle of the mat. That's okay, honey, you can stand up. Mommy knows you're not a baby. You're in big girl undies, so you don't have to lie down. Megan shook her head still but didn't seem able to resist as he mother undid the buckles of her shortles, letting them drop to her ankles with a plop. Megan shut her eyes to the world as her wet pull-ups were revealed to her mom and Brian. He felt a bit bad about standing there watching this all, but like a car accident, something compelled him to stay and watch. Amanda poked her fingers in the waist of the pull-ups and yanked them down as well, revealing Megan's naked bottom to Brian. The poor girl whimpered and covered her privates from her mother while the woman took her ankles one at a time and slipped the shortles and sopping wet pull-ups off her. There we go, Meggie. Isn't that better? Amanda cooed. Megan was still too busy trying to cover her shame to care about anything else. She just wanted her mother to get the new pull-up on her. She didn't even care that it was something a toddler wore, she just wanted something to cover up her nudity. But her mother was taking her time, oblivious to her daughter's embarrassment. She looked around and then declared, "Oops, forgot the wipes." "Okay, Just wait right here, sweetheart, while Mommy goes upstairs and gets some tissue from the bathroom. Don't go anywhere till I get you cleaned up. Don't go anywhere. Where would I go? I'm all naked. Megan exclaimed. You're not naked, silly goose. You've got a shirt on. But still, I don't want you running outside naked, since this isn't our house and Brian's mom might not be happy about that. Megan stood there absolutely flabbergasted as her mom left the room to look for tissue. There she was, naked from the waist down, wet with her own pee and in plain view of one of her best male friends. For a few minutes out in the yard this had all been fun, but now it had taken a serious turn for the worse. And now that she thought about it, why had that been so fun in the yard? What was happening to them to make them enjoy kiddie toys and lose control of their bladders? Brian was having similar thoughts as he watched Megan stand shivering and ashamed before him. The only bright spot for him was that he still seemed to have control over his bladder. At least he hoped he did anyway. Okay, time for my big boy to make Mommy proud, Sarah announced, entering the room with a strange contraption. Brian couldn't figure out what the heck it was she was carrying. It looked like a big plastic flower pot built into a stool. As she came closer though, Brian could see that the top was a hole surrounded by a contoured yellow plastic seat. It was only when she set it on the carpeted floor that it hit him. This was a potty chair. It was just like the kind he'd seen toddlers use, except that it was bigger and had legs lifting it slightly higher off the ground. In other words, it was meant for someone fully grown, like him. Sarah smiled encouragingly at her son and gestured to the seat. Come on, Brian, let's get all that pee-pee out so you can play and not have to worry about keeping you big boy pants dry. No. Brian yelped, stepping back from the disgusting little seat. I don't have to go. Don't play that game with me, mister. We both know that's what you say every time right before you tinkle your pants. Now let's give the potty a try for once, like a big kid. Brian didn't want to sit down on that stupid potty and make pee-pee right in front of his mommy and his friends. That would be even more humiliating than what was happening to Megan right now. He considered running away, bolting out the front door right now. But then how far could he get? He was barefoot, no sign of shoes anywhere. Everyone in the world now seemed to think he was an incompetent toddler. He'd be found and returned home by the police in no time. So Brian just stood there, unable to figure out what to do as Sarah stepped forward and began to undo the buckles on his overalls. With a couple of snaps, Brian heard the buckles undo and felt the shoulder straps go loose. Mommy slipped them off, and just like that the overalls dropped to his ankles, revealing a white pull-up with a Winnie the Pooh design on the front. As his mother reached for his pull-up, Brian squirmed, trying to step backwards but impeded by the bunched-up overalls. Stay still, you little wiggleworm, Sarah told him. Brian let out a little moan of despair as his mom grasped the pull-up and yanked it down. Instantly he shivered from head to toe as cool air rushed across his exposed privates. He tried to cover up his shame as Megan had, but his mom had grabbed his hands and was turning him around and forcing him to sit on the potty seat. Soon he felt the cool plastic on his bare bottom. There we go, sitting on his potty like a big boy. Good job, Brian. Sarah praised. Brian didn't feel like a big boy, not one little bit. He felt demeaned, stripped of all power and dignity. The only small comfort was that the potty seat shielded his penis from view. At least he wasn't being forced to stand half-naked in the middle of the room like Megan was. Unfortunately, Joy had just arrived with Rachel and she led the girl into the room, positioning her so she was looking at Brian. He couldn't bring himself to make eye contact with her. He stared at his feet, the bare toes just peeking out from the pile of his clothes. Joy seemed oblivious to the young man's embarrassment. Look, Rachel, she directed her daughter, pointing at the poor fellow on the potty seat. Brian's using the potty like a big boy. Are you going to show him how you can use the potty too? Brian could just make out Rachel wordlessly shaking her head from the corner of his eye. It all seemed like a bad dream to him. It was like the recurring nightmare he'd once had about being naked at school. This, however, seemed infinitely worse. He wondered how long he'd be subjected to this humiliation. She couldn't make him sit here for too long, could she? It wasn't like he could actually go. There was no way he could pee in front of all these people. It was the strange sound that broke Brian out of his reverie. It sounded like water rushing down a drain somewhere. He couldn't figure out where the noise was coming from, though it sounded very close. Then he saw the wide grins his mom and Joy had on their faces and the look of horror Rachel had on hers. Now it was she who was avoiding eye contact with him. "Good boy." Sarah cheered. It took another second for Brian to put it all together. Then it finally clicked. The noise was one of liquid splashing against plastic. It was the sound of him making tinkles in the potty. He hadn't even felt his bladder let go. He was tinkling his pee-pee out into this silly child's toy in front of his best friends and his mom without even being able to control it. And the worst part of it was that these adults were actually praising him for it. "Look, honey, Brian is making tinkles," Joy announced to Rachel. Even Megan was now looking over her shoulder at Brian's plight while her mom assured her, "Don't worry, Meggie, you'll get the chance to show Brian you can use the potty like a big girl just like him soon enough." It was all too much for Brian. He could feel his eyes beginning to sting as they welled up with tears. He tried to control his emotions, not look any more of a little kid than he already did. He couldn't keep it together though, and soon salty tears were streaking down his blushing cheeks. "Oh sweetie," Sarah cooed as she saw Brian's distress. "What's the matter, buddy? Mommy is very proud of her big boy. There's no reason for crocodile tears." The steady flow of pee into the potty had tapered off to a few final spurts, the noises still echoing through the room to Brian's horror. As it finally stopped, Brian sniffled and declared, "I'm not supposed to use this little kid potty." Sarah gave him a sympathetic look and leant in close, wrapping her arms around him and brushing her hand through his hair. There, she whispered. "It's okay, buddy, I think my big boy just needs some cuddles from his mommy." Brian sobbed quietly as his mom snuggled him close. He couldn't deny that this felt really nice, being in his mommy's strong protective arms. Her sweater was soft and cuddly on his skin and she smelled of her familiar perfume. Brian leant his face onto her shoulder, drying his tears on it while her hand rubbed his back. As his sniffles slowed down, he heard Mommy whisper into his ear again. "There we go. Feeling better, sweetie?" Brian pulled back and looked into his mommy's loving face, seeing that her eyes filled with concern for him. Whatever else was wrong, it at least felt nice to be so loved. He didn't have to reply to her question, as she could see his answer in his eyes. "Okay, let's get you up so Rachel can make her tinkles too," she directed, lifting Brian back to his feet by his armpits and helping him back into his pull-up and overalls. Brian was led over to the couch to wait while Rachel did her business. Mommy sat next to him and slipped his teddy, Buddy, into his arms to comfort him. It didn't surprise him that much anymore that snuggling the teddy in his arms was actually quite comforting. In fact, he found himself resting his head against his mommy's shoulder again, growing a bit sleepy. His potty ordeal had really been quite draining. Megan meanwhile was being forced to give up her attempts to retain a shred of her privacy as her mother pulled her hands away from her privates so she could wipe her clean. The young woman at least managed to face the opposite wall so that all Brian could see was her bare bum. After a few moments, Amanda helped Megan to step into a new white pull-up with pink print swirls. "There we go, all set," Amanda declared. Megan stared at her, dumbfounded. "What about my pants?" she asked. "Oh, I don't think we need to bother with those, princess. It'll be nap time soon anyway. I don't want to run around in just a dumb pull-up, mommy." Amanda chuckled and said to Sarah, "Isn't it cute when they try to act all grown up, ignoring the girl's plea?" "I know, they all want to grow up so quickly." Sarah agreed. Soon they'll be missing the days when they could run around with no pants on. The sounds of pee-pee splashing in the potty echoed through the room again and all heads turned to look at Rachel. The poor young lady, only yesterday an honor student and mature adult, had her face buried in her hands as she peed. "That a girl." Joy was praising her, to no avail. Rachel finally looked up from her hands with anger etched across her face. She was humiliated all right, but she was also pissed. "This is all wrong. I will not let you treat me like this," she spat at her mother. "Rachel, good girls don't talk to their mommies that way," Amanda sternly told the girl. "And remember to use your inside voice please," she added. The young woman on the oversized potty fumed, but seemed stung by her mom's rebuke. Joy turned to the other moms and said, "I think they're all getting pretty cranky. Rachel certainly needs a nap anyway." "Yes, I think they could all do with a nap before we get a full-blown temper tantrum," Amanda agreed while Sarah nodded. Joy helped Rachel to stand again, wiping her dry with a tissue and then letting her slide her pull-ups back up. No one bothered to ask them if they were actually sleepy. All three simply found themselves being led upstairs to Brian's bedroom. None of them struggled this time, not after Brian winked at the girls and placed his finger to his lips. The three college friends stayed silent and behaved while their moms settled them on the carpeted floor of the room and placed well-worn baby blankets over them, slipping plush stuffed animals into their arms. Then with a flurry of forehead kisses the moms withdrew so their little ones could sleep in peace. Alone again at last, none of the trio actually went to sleep, despite the fact that they all did feel oddly drowsy. It wasn't dark out yet, heck it was only late afternoon, but there they were lying down to go to sleep while older kids could be heard playing outside. None of them said a word about the ridiculous situation they were in. None of them wanted to risk a mom coming back in to shush them and coddle them even more. After 5 minutes of silence it was Brian who finally spoke up, though only at a low whisper. "Rach, Meg, you still awake?" "Yes," two voices whispered back. Brian rolled on his side to look over at his friends, still cuddling Buddy's soft form against his chest. Rachel was nearest to him, a stuffed white bunny in her arms, sad eyes staring back at him. Megan was beside her, but crept forward from underneath her blankie to be part of the conversation. "This is all too weird, guys. How do we get out of this?" Brian put to them. "Why don't we just run away now?" Megan suggested. "Our mommies aren't here, they think we're sleeping. We could just sneak out your window." Rachel rolled her eyes. "Oh yeah, 3 pants-wetting toddlers running barefoot down the street, one without so much as a pair of shorts to cover her pull-ups. I'm sure no one will stop us," she muttered sarcastically. "Well, do you have a better idea?" Megan snapped back. "This is no time to argue," Brian reminded them. "But Rachel's right. Even if we could change into better clothes, everything in that closet is no doubt made for a toddler and none of us has shoes. That also doesn't change the fact that we apparently can't control our pee-pee anymore." "I didn't pee-pee in my pants," Rachel reminded them haughtily. "Yet," Megan snapped. "Look, the point is we wouldn't make it far without some adult intervening. This is America, people tend to notice unattended little kids out on the street. So what do we do then?" Rachel sighed. "We know that book caused all this, right? So we get our hands on it again and find a way to fix things." The girls both nodded now, agreeing with Brian. "But where is it?" Rachel asked. "Remember we just left it out there in the yard. With all the pants tinkling and playing I forgot all about it. Look, one of our moms will have taken it with the rest of our stuff, so whoever finds it first stash it somewhere until we can look at it together. We don't want to cause any more changes now, do we?" Rachel and Megan nodded vigorously. "So what do we do till then?" Megan asked. "Just keep playing along, I guess. It's not like we have much choice." "Yeah, but Brian," Megan began, her voice quavering now. There's something wrong with me too. I really enjoyed that place. I mean, it was fun going down that slide and climbing. I forgot how stupid I must look. I forgot I was dressed like a toddler. And then, I didn't even feel it. I tinkled in my pants and didn't know till I felt it all over my pull-ups. Brian and Rachel shared concerned looks as Megan whispered her fears to them. I know what you mean, Meg. I thought I was just going to hide from Mommy in there at first. But then, when I got inside something came over me. I don't know why, but it was just so much fun to play like a little kid. And I didn't realize when I started to pee either, Brian admitted. This is all wrong. We're mature young adults and we still have our minds right. We haven't been changed into drooling idiots like our friends. So it is up to us to fix this thing. So let's pull ourselves, Rachel interrupted herself to yawn loudly, together. As though it were contagious, both Brian and Megan began to yawn as well. Why am I so sleepy? Megan asked. Dunno, I think we all are. Think I'll just shut my eyes for a sec, Brian mumbled, cuddling his teddy closer and shutting his droopy eyes. Rachel and Megan followed suit, and within seconds all three were fast asleep, cuddled with their stuffed friends at 4 in the afternoon. All dressed up. Wakey sleepyheads. Brian and the girls opened their eyes some time later to find Sarah standing smiling over them. Looking over at the window they could see it was still daylight out, but it was definitely later in the day. They had actually taken a nap, their mommies had been right about them being tired after all. Come on, you're 3, nap time is over. We need to get some nummies in those tummies now. We're gonna eat. Brian asked his mom. Yep, Rachel and Megan's mommies went and picked up their little brother and sister so we can all go out to dinner. We're all going to Pasta Pete's, Sarah announced. Brian swallowed a groan. Pasta Pete's was a local family restaurant, always filled with annoying kids and squalling babies. It wasn't the kind of place college kids ever ate at. In fact, he couldn't remember going there since he was about 10. Still, he forced a smile, remembering the decision they'd made to play along until they had the book again. They followed Brian's mom back downstairs to the living room where the other 2 moms were already waiting. As they entered the room, Brian got his first look at Dan, Rachel's little brother. She'd said before that he was dressed and acting like a toddler, so Brian was interested to see if the second reality shift had changed him as well. As soon as they set eyes on the 18-year-old young man, they knew the world had shifted for everyone once again. When they were kindergartners, he'd been a toddler. Now that they were somewhere in the terrible twos themselves, it appeared he had gone even further back. Since his body hadn't changed, it was hard to gauge his mental age exactly, but from his dress and behavior Brian figured the kid was about 18 months rather than years now. Danny was sitting on his bottom in the middle of the room wearing a small green striped t-shirt and a bulky white diaper. The puffy garment was certainly no set of pull-ups, that was for sure. He wore no pants over the diaper either, his long bare legs, smooth and hairless like Brian's, splayed out before him. He wiggled the toes on his bare feet back and forth idly as he scribbled aimlessly with an awkwardly held green crayon across a sheet of paper between his legs. The sight of Danny grinning while he scribbled with crayon was nothing compared to what was going on just across the room. There Amanda was sitting with her daughter Sue on the couch. All 3 of them stopped where they were and gaped at what was happening before their eyes. Sue was dressed in a fuzzy yellow onesie, her crinkly white diaper sticking out of it a bit around the leg holes. Her smooth bare legs were draped across the couch as her body lay across her mom's lap. They couldn't see her face, only the back of her head, the thin wild hair tied up in a single hairband so it stood straight up. Her face was obscured because Amanda had her pulled in close to her bosom. The teen girl was suckling on her mommy's boob. In the silence that fell when the trio froze, all they could hear was the scribble of Danny's crayon on paper and Sue suckling. Amanda was gently rubbing the teen's back and whispering into the overgrown baby's ear. Rachel seemed to be the most disturbed by the sight, covering her mouth tightly as though trying not to vomit. Brian was having a different but equally embarrassing reaction. Physically he was still very much a guy, and so he couldn't help but stare at the scene on the couch, praying for Sue to finish so he could get a look at Amanda's boobs. He'd thought they looked unusually big before, and now he knew why. she was nursing. "Well, here we all are," Sarah announced cheerfully, entering the room behind the three frozen kids. Danny looked up from his drawing, the crayon dropping from his uncoordinated fingers. "Danny, eat," he yelled, patting his tummy with both hands. "Yes, Danny, we're all going to eat soon," Sarah agreed, nodding to the boy. "Who that?" Danny shouted back, pointing at Brian. "That's my little boy Brian," Sarah replied. "Who that?" the teen shouted again, now pointing at Megan while he's twiddling his toes together. "That's Megan. She's a big girl like your sister Rachel," she answered. Apparently satisfied, Danny rose awkwardly to a squat, then stood with his arms out for balance. Once he was fully upright, he stuck his hands out towards them and toddled over. His legs were bowed out widely, but they couldn't tell if that was due to the thick diaper or just his immature gait. In any case, he seemed able to walk and even run on his own, but clearly not with very much skill or balance. He made a beeline for his sister, wrapping his arms around the poor girl who was still trying to hold back an urge to throw up. "Ah!" Sarah cooed as Danny gave his sis a big baby hug. All eyes turned to the couch just then as the sound of suckling abruptly stopped. Amanda was easing Sue's mouth off her breast, a bit of white milky liquid dribbling down the girl's chin and a visible strand still connecting nipple to slack lips. The string of milk and spittle broke as Sue's head slipped back into her mom's cradling elbow. Brian's eyes were big as saucers and he felt drawn towards Amanda, not taking his eyes off her exposed breast. He moved across the room towards her, barely aware he was doing so. Amanda didn't seem to notice or care about his interest. She only had eyes for the big baby in her lap. Brian was standing right before her soon enough, licking his lips and feeling glad the tight pull-up and overalls hid the reaction he was having. Then a hiccup broke his concentration and he glanced down at the teen girl lying across the couch before him. Sue was a pretty girl, but it was clear that she was now nothing but a big infant. Her bare legs were bowed out by the thick diaper, even more so than Danny's. They twitched and kicked without coordination. Sue's eyes were wide open, but there was nobody home. The baby blue eyes stared vacantly between the ceiling and her mom's face, glassy and empty of recognition. A rivulet of slobber was creeping down her left cheek, her chin already wet with milky drool. Sue burbled and spluttered silly meaningless sounds before bringing her hands to her mouth and chewing on her fingers. As she mouthed them, Brian was able to see that Sue had no more than a couple small teeth. It was a stunning sight. "Is Sue all done feeding?" Sarah asked. "Yep, my little Susie's had her nummy-nums," Amanda replied, fixing her bra and doing her shirt back up. "Okay, let's get the kids ready," Sarah said. Joy came in from the kitchen and headed straight over to where Danny was now playfully turning the hallway light switch on and off. She was carrying a pair of elastic waist khakis shorts. "Okay, buddy boy, time to get you all dressed up for the restaurant," she declared. Danny cooperated while she slipped the shorts on him. He seemed too enthralled with the light switches to even care that he was being dressed. Brian doubted the boy cared one bit as he was dressed in anyway. In his state of mind, he probably would have been happy to go to the restaurant buck naked or in a frilly pink dress. Amanda set Sue down on the carpet and rummaged through a bag to get something for Megan to wear. Soon she emerged with a pair of pink shorts. "Okay, sweetie, come to mommy," she beckoned. Megan was all too happy to comply. She was sick of being the only one with no pants on. Little pink shorts with hearts were not her usual, but they could have been so much worse. So she let her mom slip them over one foot at a time and pull them up. It was a relief to have her pull-ups covered up at last. In fact, she was better off than Rachel now, as her short little dress failed to hide her puffy pull-ups. Having successfully clothed her son, Joy had now turned to Rachel, directing her to sit on the floor. Rachel had done as she was told, hopeful she'd be dressed in something at least marginally better than the silly outfit she had on at the moment. She was not a fan of frills and cutesy short dresses, even on little girls. She'd have been happy even to be dressed as her friend Megan was. But when Joy returned from the front hall, she didn't have a new outfit for her daughter, just a pair of glitter-covered jelly sandals which she proceeded to strap onto the pouting girl's feet. With the kids dressed, the other two moms seemed ready to go as well. Amanda scooped Sue up from the carpet and steadied the teen girl on her hip, slipping a red and white binky between the girl's lips. Brian looked around and furrowed his brow. "Where are my shoes, Mommy?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. "Don't worry, honey, you'll be fine without them," she assured. Brian shook his head. He couldn't go out in public, to a restaurant, without any shoes on. They wouldn't let him in like that, would they? "Mommy, I need shoes," he insisted. Sarah rolled her eyes and turned to the other moms, ignoring her son's pleas. "He pulls his shoes and socks off every time I put them on him. I can't tell you how many sneakers and socks are now missing a partner because he throws them away. It's easier just to let him go barefoot, you know." Joy nodded. "I know, my little Danny's the same way. He just loves having his toesies all free. Funny how little kids just hate shoes." "If it's just shoes they hate, you're getting off easy," Amanda told them. "My little ones hate wearing clothes altogether." The mothers shared a round of laughter at their struggles while Brian continued to plead. "But Rachel has shoes." "Well, Rachel is becoming a young lady and she knows how to keep her shoes on like a big girl," Sarah retorted. Brian was crestfallen but could see this was a losing battle. Megan was being led by the hand to the car in her bare feet as well, but she wasn't complaining. She was just happy she'd been given something to cover her pull-ups. Of course the restaurant wouldn't care that they were barefoot, Brian admitted, because little toddlers didn't count as real people. So he gave up and padded out the front door after his mom, wincing as he trod over sharp pebbles and hot tarmac to the car. He just kept thinking about how he would get the book back soon and then somehow he'd end this nightmare. Eating out. Pasta Pete's was a buzzing cauldron of activity. Families with screaming kids sat at every table while waiters in tacky white shirts, red bow ties, and black suspenders rushed about with large trays of food. It was a cheap family restaurant, all right, complete with red and white checked plastic tablecloths and pictures of stereotypical Italian street scenes on the walls. As they waited for a table to open up, Brian looked around at the other families seated or waiting for a table. Men a few years older than him twisted back and forth excitedly while parents held their hands. A 40-ish woman tied a bib around the neck of a messy-faced young lady about their age. Brian decided that in this new world children stayed infants much longer than normal, but then rather suddenly grew up between age 18 and 30. He saw no appreciable difference in behavior between kids who looked 16 and those who looked 10. After 10 minutes of excruciating waiting in the crowded entry area, a man in a stupid waiter outfit topped off with a straw boater hat appeared with a set of menus. He looked over the assembled family and smiled pleasantly at them. He didn't groan at the sight of a gaggle of unhygienic and potentially vagrant young adults in a restaurant without shoes. All he saw was a group of cute 20-year-old toddlers. "Welcome to Pasta Pete's. Follow me please," he directed. The table was made up for them already. 2 of the chairs were quite different from the rest. They couldn't really be called high chairs because of course they didn't lift their occupants any higher than the normal seats. Yet they looked like high chairs. They even had straps to buckle occupants into them. 3 other chairs at the table had red booster seats on them. The trio knew these were for them and they took their special seats without comment. They had been sat next to each other, a cup of crayons and 3 placemats with lots of kids' puzzles and games laid out before them. Trying to get their minds off their predicament, they each took a crayon and began to work on the puzzles while the moms got the babies settled in their high chairs, threading legs through the holes and doing up seat buckles. Sue's binky dropped from her mouth and she immediately began to squall. Luckily Amanda found it and cleaned it off quickly, reinserting it in the crying girl's mouth. Her tears were gone as quickly as they began. Returning his attention to the puzzle, Brian found the maze he was working on trickier than expected. For one thing, it was very tough to manipulate the crayon. He couldn't grasp it correctly for some reason. He'd used pens and pencils for years, but the manner in which you were supposed to hold one escaped him. Sending the crayon where he wanted to was equally difficult. He kept crossing the lines. Even worse though, he couldn't seem to think ahead. He kept hitting dead ends in what should have been a simple maze. The whole thing was frustrating and worrying. Brian finally abandoned the maze and threw his crayon away, looking over at his friend's papers to see they too were having trouble. Rachel was having a hard time just connecting the dots on her mat, while Megan's usual drawings were now nothing but scribbles. It was quite a relief when the food finally came, though Rachel was particularly upset their mothers had simply ordered for them without even asking for their preferences. She didn't want plain old spaghetti, but no one would give her a menu, and even if they had, she knew she wouldn't have been able to read it anyway. As the waiter set down plates before them, the moms were all quickly out of their seats, tying bibs around Sue and Danny, then turning to the toddlers. Joy picked up Rachel's napkin, unfolded it and began to stuff it into the neck of her dress like a makeshift bib. "Hey, stop it. I don't need that," Rachel insisted, twisting back and forth to escape her mom's hands. "I'm sure you'll be a big girl and be very clean for me, dear, but just in case we need to keep your pretty dress clean." "Pretty dress? I hate this stupid thing, just leave me alone," Rachel wailed loud enough to make heads turn from nearby tables. "Rachel, don't make a scene," Joy scolded. "Sit still and be a good girl or there will be no dessert for you." Rachel pouted but quieted down, not because of the threat but because she realized people were indeed looking at her like a bratty toddler. Megan and Brian said nothing as their moms tucked napkins into their shirts the same way. If coloring with crayons had been hard, eating was near impossible. Brian blamed the utensils. While the adults had normal metal forks and knives, they had to make do with simple plastic cutlery. Abandoning the proper adult grip, Brian held his fork in his closed fist and shoveled the spaghetti into his mouth as best he could. Sure enough, it wasn't long before his napkin bib was stained liberally in tomato sauces. He was certain his cheeks and chin were no better. It took all his concentration to bring the fork to his mouth properly. His only consolation was that Rachel and Megan were doing no better. "This is stupid," Rachel finally declared, throwing down her fork and crossing her arms in frustration. Joy looked up from her meal and gave her daughter a firm look. "Rachel, finish your meal," she said calmly. "No. I don't even like spaghetti with tomato sauce." "Rachel, if you don't finish that, no dessert for you tonight." "I don't care." "Really? You won't care when your friends Brian and Megan are eating yummy ice cream and you have to just watch." Rachel said nothing, but didn't even look at the food. Joy sighed and got up from her seat, going to Rachel's side. "Rachel, you are going to eat your dinner or Mommy will have to feed it to you like a little baby." "No." Rachel gasped, looking up at her mother with terror. "Yes, Rachel, eat like a big girl or like a baby, it's your choice." Her bottom lip quivering, Rachel picked the fork back up and shoveled another messy load of spaghetti into her mouth. "I'm not a baby," she insisted. "I know that, honey," her mommy assured her. "You're a big girl who can feed herself. Now show Mommy how you can finish all your food," Joy encouraged, rubbing Rachel's shoulder. By the end of the meal, all three were feeling quite silly about how messy they'd gotten. Although they weren't nearly as bad as little Danny, who'd fed himself with his fingers. The giggling teen's hands, cheeks, and chin were all red with sauce. Megan was feeling a bit overly full from the meal, even though it hadn't really been that much. She burped loudly and then cringed with embarrassment at her faux pas. The mothers just smiled and giggled at her rudeness though. As the moms worked on cleaning their babies' faces with wet naps, Danny's smile left his face and he got a look of intense concentration. For a moment the trio wondered it may be some of the old Dan's adult mentality was trying to break through. Then they heard the rude noises, muffled by his diaper and shorts, erupting from him. Loud farts and little popping sounds could be heard as he squinted and grunted softly. Brian gasped and looked away when he realized what was happening. Rachel was frozen in horror watching her own brother soil himself. Megan was absolutely disgusted. The teenaged young man smiled again as he finished his business, looking up at his mommy and announcing, "Poopy." "Uh-oh," Rachel chuckled, "I think we have a little Mr. Stinkerpants here." The smell of what the young fellow had done wafted through the air, leaving no doubt he'd made a real load in his big diaper. The scent of it and the smile on Danny's face was too much for Megan. She gagged and covered her mouth, but combined with her indigestion she couldn't hold it back. Megan vomited a bit before regaining control. It wasn't that much, but it was down her bib and badly stained her shirt. Just the sight of the disgusting stuff on her Sesame Street shirt made her want to throw up even more. "Oh, Megan!" Amanda exclaimed, rushing to her daughter's side. "Are you feeling sick, honey?" "It stinks," Megan managed to blurt out. "Oh, poor girl, you must have eaten too much, baby. And you've gotten it all over your nice shirt too." Megan blinked back tears, looking around her and realizing people were staring. "I'm sorry," she mumbled. "It's okay, honey, Mommy will get you all cleaned up." Amanda turned to the other moms and asked, "Could you watch them for a sec? I need to go to the car and get her a new shirt." Sarah nodded. "I'll watch them. Joy, you just go take care of Danny." Joy nodded and unbuckled the boy from the chair. "Okay, little stinker, let's get you changed," she chirped, leading the still grinning boy to the bathroom with the diaper bag over her shoulder. Amanda tutted as she looked over the mess her daughter had made of her shirt. "Okay, honey, let's get you out of this messy shirt. Mommy will get you a clean one from the car," she told Megan, grasping the bottom of the shirt and pulling it up. Megan shrieked and pulled away, but it happened so suddenly she wasn't prepared for it. In one swift motion her shirt was up over her head and slipping off her upraised arms. Just like that she found herself sitting in a crowded family restaurant topless, not even a bra to hide her breasts. "Mommy, I'm topless," she gasped, crossing her arms to keep some dignity. "Well, you can't just sit in a shirt covered in throw-up, sweetie. Mommy will be back with your unicorn shirt in a second." As her mother left with her shirt, Megan shivered in shame. This was worse than what had happened at home. As bad as that had seemed at the time, being topless in full public view was infinitely worse. Sure, it had happened a couple times at drunken parties back at college, but that was different. Then she'd chosen to take off her shirt and she'd been one of several topless girls. Now no one was even staring at her, no one cared that her boobs were on display. She was just another toddler who'd ruined her shirt as far as anyone was concerned. Somehow that made it all even worse. While Brian was trying not to get caught staring at his half-naked friend, Rachel had problems of her own to worry about. The urge to pee had struck her suddenly and violently. It was as though she'd been holding it in all day. She was seriously worried she wouldn't be able to wait long. I need to potty," she called out, immediately regretting her childish choice of words but unable to think of how else to explain her need. Angry at her inability to fit the shapes through the holes, Rachel slammed the toy into the floor, pouting and crossing her arms. "It's a stupid little kid toy anyway," she huffed. "Rachel, what's the matter, sweetie? Why the frowny face?" They turned to see Pam had returned and seen Rachel's disgust with the toy. She knelt beside them and ran a hand through Rachel's hair. The girl grimaced and pulled away. She didn't like being petted like some kitty. Pam drew back and frowned at the fussy girl. "Are you feeling okay, Rachel? Does your tummy ache? Do you have an OE?" she prodded in a sing-song voice. "No." Rachel snapped back. "Just leave me alone." "Now, Rachel, we don't talk to grown-ups like that. Be a good girl and use your inside voice." Rachel seethed but kept her mouth shut. Well, you'll be feeling better soon, honey. We're going to have some real fun now," she promised. While Rachel sat fuming, Pam and another carer fetched a large rolled-up sheet. They spread it across the carpet in the middle of the room until it covered half the space. The other carer then brought in a bundle of white garments. The duo watched as Pam and the other woman began slipping smocks over children's heads, covering up their clothing. Baggy armholes left their hands free. Rachel watched Brian accept his smock willingly and decided not to put up a fight as Pam threaded the girl's arms through the appropriate holes. She even bit her lip and stayed silent as the woman slipped her socks off so the pretty princess socks wouldn't get messy. The reason for their new wardrobes was soon revealed. Pam and her colleague brought in several painters' bucket filled with various colors of paint. They also had large sheets of paper for each child. They set these down in the middle of the protective sheet and then clapped their hands to get everyone's attention. "Okay, children, we're going to do something really fun today," Pam announced. "It's time for finger painting." Several young men and women screeched happily and clapped their hands. Maggie could be seen hopping on her bum in excitement. Rachel groaned. The last thing she wanted was to get all messy. She hated being dirty and now she was going to be forced to actually dip her hands in icky paint. Rachel sat resolutely still while the others crept and toddled over to the paint buckets. Brian shrugged and made his way over as well, leaving Rachel alone. Soon the kids were all quite messy. Bright purple, red, green and yellow paint were everywhere, splashed across the sheet, rubbed all over the smocks, on face and in hair. The marine-built man had moved beyond finger painting, dipping his feet into the green bucket and slapping his bare soles back and forth on his canvas to create lots of green footprints. To Rachel's dismay, even Brian seemed to quickly get absorbed in the game. He had yellow handprints all over the front of his smock, green paint smeared across a cheek, his toes covered in blue, yet he was smiling. "Come on, Rachel, don't you want to have fun?" Pam called from the middle of it. "I'm fine," Rachel replied. Pam didn't take no for an answer though. She headed over to the college girl and took her hand. "You can't just sit there like a bump on the log, silly goose. Now let's make some pretty pictures for your mommy. You don't want your mommy to be the only one without a pretty picture, do you?" "I don't want to," Rachel whined, trying to stay put but failing. Somehow the woman seemed exceedingly stronger than Rachel even though she was the same height. "Don't be silly, you'll have lots of fun." "I don't want to get messy," Rachel insisted. "It'll all wash out, Rachel, I promise. Just have some fun. Look how much Brian is enjoying it." Rachel grunted with disdain as Pam sat her down in the middle of the gaggle of screeching messy toddlers. A fleck of purple splashed across her cheek and she recoiled as if slapped. But Pam still had her hand and she was pulling it down to a bucket of yellow paint. She couldn't resist as she felt her hand dip into the smooth, cool liquid. It wasn't as viscous as house paint, it was more gelled, less likely to splash all over or drip into sensitive eyes. She felt it squish between her fingers, across her palms. Pam lifted her hand out of the bucket and guided it to a blank sheet of paper, placing it down and then lifting so she'd made a handprint. Rachel looked down at the results. There was no picture to paint, of course, no design to follow. It was a simple sensory exercise for small children. And yet it felt so nice. Far from feeling dirty and sullied, the paint on her hand squished delightfully as she flexed her fingers. Rachel looked around at the other colors. They were all familiar, but their names escaped her, much as with the shapes. One triggered a memory though, and so she dipped her clean hand into a bucket of blue, then rubbed her two hands together. Aside from the pleasant squishing sensation, she was delighted to find that both her hands were now a brand new color, green. "I made a new color," she announced out loud. "Very good, dear," Pam praised. Rachel giggled to herself and placed her hands back on the canvas, smearing them about. Her skin seemed super sensitive now, nerves lighting up with pleasure as she dipped her hands back in more paint and smeared it more. Feeling mischievous at getting so messy, she leant over and rubbed brown paint all over the back of another child's smock. Then she felt foreign hands on her bare arm. She turned to find Maggie smiling wickedly as she coated the arm in pink paint. Rachel had to get her back. So she wiped her now purple hand on Meg's cheek. A finger paint war had begun. It was only 15 minutes later as one carer removed the paint buckets and Pam led the children outside to get cleaned up that Rachel became aware of what a fool she looked like. She was covered in finger paint. It was in her hair, across her cheeks, down her arms and all over her smock. To her chagrin she saw that Pam was right to take her socks off, as paint was even squishing between her toes. Pam was right, little kids here were better off barefoot, and that clearly included Rachel herself. In fact, as they stood to head outside she saw that even Brian wasn't as messy as her. Somehow clean, mature Rachel had ended up among the dirtiest of these overgrown tots. She wished she could escape to the bathroom so Pam and Brian wouldn't see how far she'd fallen. It was bad enough when Meggie gave her that goofy idiotic grin and declared, "All methy." Outside Pam was stripping the children out of their smocks after washing the paint off them with a garden hose. Rachel stood in line sulking and trying not to make eye contact with Brian while Pam washed Timmy's buzzcut hair clean of the green paint he'd gotten in it. When she lifted his smock off though, Timmy started to grab at the crotch of his visible pull-ups, knees bending inwards. "Timmy got a potty," he announced loudly. "Oh, okay, just hold it in for me like a big boy and Miss Corley will be right out to take you to the potty. Can you hold it like a big boy for me?" Timmy nodded and moved to the side as Pam took the next girl to be cleaned. But behind her back Timmy toddled away across the small backyard to a bush that sat in the middle of the grass. There he inserted a finger in either side of his pull-ups and yanked them down to his ankles. Rachel watched in disgust as he proceeded to pee-pee on the bush. When he was done he simply kicked his feet free of the pull-up and turned around, ambling happily across the lawn towards them with his equipment dangling out for all to see. "Oh my gosh," Rachel gasped. The marine-built young man skipped along the grass, his wee-wee swinging and bobbing about freely without a hint of shame. Soon he was back next to Pam and eagerly tugging at her sleeve. "When potty," he told her happily, his free hand playing idly with his former manhood. Pam looked down at his nudity and chuckled. "Looks like we have a little streaker here," she joked. "So you went potty, did you?" Timmy nodded emphatically. "Where'd you do that, hon?" "Dear," Timmy announced, pointing to the bush. "Honey, that's good that you didn't use your pull-up, but big boys use the potty chair. Can you try and wait till you're on the chair next time? For me, honey." Timmy nodded solemnly now. "Okay, now where are your big boy pants, ya little jaybird?" Timmy pointed wordlessly at the bush again. "Well, go get 'em if you're a big boy." Timmy hurried across the grass again, bending over and picking up the pull-ups with both hands, and giving everyone a look at his big bare bottom. Then he returned and handed them to Pam, who praised him for keeping them dry and then helped the 6-foot-tall half-naked man slip them back onto his legs and up to cover his privates again. Rachel was aghast at the whole scene, but it only got worse when Timmy skipped back into the house. Pam then turned to her and said, "Okay Rachel, your turn." Rachel cringed as the woman looked her over and clucked her tongue. "My oh my, it looks like someone had fun after all," Pam declared. Rachel kept her eyes on the ground as the woman took her hand and began to scrub it clean. The cold water of the garden hose poured over her arms and then her head while Pam cleaned her. "My, what a messy girl you are, Rachel," she exclaimed more than once. It was all too much for the woman and she began to cry in earnest. Tears streamed down her blushing cheeks. She could taste their saltiness as they reached her lips. Pam heard the girls sobbing and stopped scrubbing for a moment, kneeling to look into Rachel's eyes. "Oh Rachel, don't cry sweetie. I was just teasing, dear. You're not a dirty girl. You just got messy playing, like you're supposed to. It's your job as a little girl to get messy and my job to clean you up." Rachel only cried all the more at being reminded of her new station in life. Pam brushed her cheek and shushed her quietly. "Come on Rachel, no more crocodile tears. When you're all cleaned up I'll give you a big snuggle." That idea was humiliating and appealing at the same time. She didn't want to be hugged and fawned over by another adult woman, but at the same time the need to be held and cuddled was very strong. She wanted to feel safe and warm and comforted. Rachel's adult side won out in the end and she pulled herself free as soon as she was clean, hurrying back into the toddler playroom. There she collapsed to her knees and cried into her hands until she felt an arm wrap over her shoulder. Brian was at her side now, pulling her close so she could weep onto his shoulder. "I know, Rach, I know it sucks. I got so messy," she whimpered. "Me too. I couldn't help it. Once I started playing." "You couldn't stop," Rachel finished his sentence. He nodded. The sliding door to the backyard slammed shut and Pam strode to the middle of the room. "Okay everyone, it's potty time. Let's get all you big boys and girls on your potties so you can make your wheeze and poos." With that she went over to the door at the other side of the room and gestured for the kids to follow. "Come on Rach, we gotta do it," Brian told her, pulling her to a standing position. "Not all at once," Rachel disagreed. I can't control mine anymore, Rach. I don't wanna go pee-pee in my pull-ups in front of everyone. I gotta use the potty just in case." Rachel nodded and followed Brian into the line. The room they entered was not a bathroom though. It was a plain white-walled room with a linoleum floor and a dozen oversized potty seats placed in a circle. They weren't all identical. A couple looked almost like real toilets aside from being made of plastic and having bright primary color designs. Others were simple big red buckets with yellow seats and a few had backs for kids to lean back against while sat on them. One by one Pam pulled down shorts and skirts, hiked up dresses and yanked down pull-ups to seat the kids on the potties. None of the young men or women seemed any more bothered than Timmy had when their privates were exposed to the group. They twisted back and forth distractedly as Pam set their adult-sized forms on the big potty chairs, tucking penises behind guards and warning them to stay put till they'd made their pee-pees and poo-piss. She reached Brian, undoing the buckles on his shortalls and letting them drop to his ankles, then slipping his pull-ups down too. Unlike any of the other boys, he immediately covered his weenie, making Pam snigger at his modesty. He also insisted on slipping his own pee-pee behind the guard, trying not to think about all the people watching him sitting here. Rachel didn't go so easily. It didn't matter that the other kids were too busy picking their noses and twiddling their toes to be staring at her. She was not about to be stripped half naked before a dozen of her former friends and classmates. When Pam approached, she stepped back and shook her head. "No, I don't have to go right now. I'll tell you when I need to pee-pee. Honey, you know the rules. All children have to sit on the potty before nap time. You don't want to have an accident and end up back in diapers like a little baby, do you?" "I won't have an accident. I just don't want to go in front of everyone." "You've got nothing to hide, sweetie. Just be a good girl and you can have a treat after nap." "So do you use a toilet with in front of all the other women here?" "There are different rules for grown-ups, sweetie, you'll understand when you're older." Rachel shook her head again and this time the carer moved towards her quickly, ready to force her. Brian couldn't sit by and watch his friend be manhandled, so he stood quickly and started to move towards them, hindered by the clothing around his ankles. He'd only made it a step when he felt warm liquid splash across his knees. He felt dizzy with shame. He was making tinkles all over the floor and his bunched-up shortalls, a golden steam of wee spurting from his dangling weenie. He froze in horror. "Brian! You need to stay on the potty, dear," Pam called out, forgetting Rachel as she rushed over and put her hands on the boy's shoulders, guiding him back onto the potty. Brian was still too embarrassed to speak as he felt the carer's cool fingers grasp his penis and push it below the splash guard. The sound of pee splashing on the plastic filled the room, but it was too late to save his pride. Several of the other children were smiling and giggling as they fidgeted on their potties. Pam had her hands on her hips and was shaking her head back and forth. "Brian, look at the mess you've made," she chided, gesturing to the yellow puddle on the linoleum floor. "Sorry," he mumbled. It's okay, dear, learning the potty isn't easy. You just need to remember to stay put if you feel the urge to tinkle. Now you've gotten your nice outfit all dirty, she said, crouching and drawing the soaked shortles off his feet. I'll get you a new pair of big boy pants, but these will have to dry out for a bit, she remarked, carrying them away. As Pam left the room, Rachel thought she'd actually escaped for once. She did feel truly awful for Brian, but at least she'd been spared. Or so she thought. Then the sound of several grown men and women tinkling loudly in their potties began to affect her. The urge to pee hit suddenly and violently. Rachel grabbed her crotch and crossed her legs sharply, seized by the need to empty her bladder. Oh no, she shrieked, waddling cross-legged to the one empty potty seat. She didn't want to do it, but the alternative was far worse. So she hiked up her dress and pulled her big girl pants down, plopping her bare bottom on the plastic seat and letting go. She sighed with relief at having made it, glancing over at the shaggy-haired boy of about 20 seated beside her. He was staring at her blankly, picking his nose with one hand and playing with himself with the other. She refused to become his equal. Whatever she had to do, she would remember that she was better than these dumb brats. Upon returning, Pam hadn't said anything to Rachel, but she had given her a knowing smile. Then the children were stood up one by one so the carer could clean them. In most cases this consisted of Pam dabbing the ends of pee-pees and wiping privates clean, then pulling the pull-ups back up. But when she stood the boy next to Rachel, it revealed his smelly, poopy bottom. Rachel gagged and very nearly threw up as the carer led the boy to the wall and had him spread his legs so she could wipe his bum clean. Rather than wait, Rachel stood and yanked her pull-ups back on, rushing out of the potty room. It was nap time next, and Brian, now clothed in just his t-shirt and pull-ups, settled on a mat beside Rachel, facing her. You okay? She managed to ask. I guess. You? She shrugged. Want a hug? Brian asked, sounding timid. Rachel couldn't resist the urge anymore, she nodded. Brian wrapped his arms around the girl and the two cuddled close. It's not a boyfriend-girlfriend thing, you know, Brian whispered to her. I need this. I know, you wanna feel safe and warm. I feel it too. I can't fight it. I want my mommy, Rachel told him. Me too, he admitted, feeling drowsy as the lullaby Pam had put on helped the kids drift off to sleep. Soon he and Rachel were both peacefully asleep in each other's arms. Home again. Oh, that is just too cute, Sarah declared, looking down at her son and his friend napping cuddled together. His mommy's voice roused Brian from his slumber just as the lullaby tape clicked off. He blinked his eyes open, looking into Rachel's still sleeping face. He stretched his arms as the lights flicked back on in the room. It was then that he noticed his mommy was actually standing right there above them. He jerked onto his back and away from Rachel in surprise. It was like his mommy had walked in on him while he had a girl over in his dorm room. Well, hello there, sleepyhead, did you have a nice cuddle with your friend? She asked him cheerily. Brian didn't know what to say, so he just nodded slowly. Rachel came to at this point and felt a little weird to wake up with this woman standing over her. Meanwhile, Brian noticed the bunched up shortles over his mommy's arm and he knew that she knew what he'd done. His eyes lowered to the floor and he crossed his legs to make their bareness less obvious. Sarah didn't comment on her son's accident though, she had other things on her mind. We're going back to your friend Meg's house for a play date today, Brian. Isn't that nice? Not waiting for a response, she continued, and your friend Rachel is coming too. Her mommy asked me to watch her while she takes Danny to the dentist. Inside, Brian was actually overjoyed at this news. Since the book wasn't at his place nor Rachel's, that meant Meg's was where it had to be. This could be their best chance to fix things. Rachel, on the other hand, was quite nervous. She'd seen what had happened to Megan. Going to the house where it likely happened was not her idea of a good plan. But she had no say in the matter, and so a few minutes later they were all piled in Sarah's car headed to Megan's house. As they drove through the streets, Maggie seemed to be having a lovely time watching the world go by. She pointed out the window time and again, patting at the glass and crowing, "Birdie," and "Fluffy," at birds and squirrels and "Woof woof" at dogs being walked along the sidewalk. She was the picture of cheerful innocence, chewing at her thumb and singing along nonsense with the music on the radio. As soon as she was freed from her restraints, Maggie leapt from her car seat onto the driveway and raced across the grass to her front door, just in time for her mommy to open it and nearly be tackled in a hug. Brian hurried to the front door just as quickly as Maggie had, feeling practically naked with his pull-ups showing to anyone passing by on the street. Rachel padded more gingerly into the house, careful not to hurt her tender soles, and upset Sarah had simply packed her shoes and socks away rather than let her put them back on. Inside the house, Brian had stopped to stare slack-jawed at Sue. The teen girl was in an adult-sized version of a baby jumper. It was suspended by elastic straps to the top of the doorway between the living room and dining room. The blue pouch Sue was sat in dangled just high enough so that only the tips of her bare wiggling toes brushed across the floor. As she fidgeted, the elastic bands would stretch and her feet would fall flat on the floor, prompting her to push up, making the pouch she was in bounce up and down. Dressed in nothing but a diaper hidden by the bouncer, she appeared naked, her breasts jiggling as she jumped. "Watch it, Brian, or your face will freeze that way," Rachel warned him. Brian blushed at being caught and pretended to be very interested in the ceiling all of a sudden. Amanda welcomed Sarah into the house and shut the door while Maggie continued to try to hug her tightly around the waist. Okay, honey. Why don't you take your friends out to the yard and play for a bit," she suggested. "Maggie, play," the girl agreed, hopping up and down so that the sound echoed through the house. Amanda nodded and commented to Sarah, "She's just getting to the age where she enjoys playing with other children, you know. It really is wonderful." "Oh yes, 21 really is a magic age for little ones, getting used to the potty, playing with other children. It is a great time," Sarah noted. "Okay, honey," Amanda told Maggie, "before you play let's get you nice and naked." Maggie chirped. With that, Amanda unzipped Maggie's play dress and slipped it down to her ankles, leaving her standing in nothing but her pull-ups. Then with one quick flourish she had those around her ankles as well. Amanda helped her daughter step clear of the piled clothing, leaving her hopping about buck naked singing, all naked. Naked, naked, naked." Seeing Sarah's confused expression, Amanda explained, "Oh, it's a new thing I'm trying. They call it naked potty training. See, whenever she has something on, even just pull-ups, she thinks it's like a diaper and she just goes. When she's naked she remembers to use the potty and she doesn't lose control while trying to get her clothes off to sit on it. Does it really work? So far, so good. That sounds like something I should try with my little guy. He has a really hard time telling me when he needs to potty," Sarah mused. "Oh, definitely give it a try. It's perfect because you know little kids have no modesty anyway. As you can see, my little Maggie just loves her naked time." What they'd seen before this moment had been bad enough. But to see Megan stark naked in all her glory was beyond the pale. There was their longtime friend and compatriot hopping around totally unclothed and happy as a lark. She wasn't drunk or slutty, she wasn't making lewd gestures for a bunch of frat boys. She was just playing like the innocent toddler she thought she was, and in her new diminished mentality clothing simply got in the way. Maggie had a slender, pretty body. Her small breasts jiggled as she hopped about. Although he tried not to stare, Brian couldn't help but notice that his friend lacked tan lines. Her bared bottom was just as tanned as her arms and legs. It seemed that in this new reality Maggie spent a lot of time nude in the sun, probably playing in the yard, perhaps even at the beach. She really was a silly little nudist now. Sarah and Amanda entered the living room leading the naked woman by her hands. Sarah said to her friend, "Yes, I think now is the perfect time for Brian to have a go at naked potty training himself. If that's okay with you." "Oh, by all means, Maggie would love to have another jaybird to play with," Amanda assured her. "You're sure?" You don't mind his pee-pee jiggling around all free? Don't be silly, nobody will mind his cute little weenie. But Brian shook his head vigorously. He felt naked in his pull-ups as it was. I don't wanna go naked, he told them. Oh, don't be fussy, Brian, Meg's mommy doesn't mind one bit. It'll be just like at home after bath, his mommy assured. Brian backed away, but there was no escape. Sue was blocking the way to the dining room and the adults were before him. He just kept shaking his head. Brian, you're just having too many accidents. Now either we try this or we have to go back to deer pies for a bit, Mommy warned. He didn't know why, but that idea actually scared him more. He didn't want to be a baby. Being a toddler was more than bad enough. No, please. No diapers, he wailed, feeling on the verge of a temper tantrum. Mommy stepped close and pulled her grown boy into a cuddle. Okay, no diapers, she agreed. Brian let out a sigh of relief. Mommy knew he wasn't a dumb little baby. But just as he felt relieved, cool hands slipped under the bottom of his red t-shirt. The chilly fingers tickled against his sides and then yanked upward, swiftly removing his shirt. A separate set of fingers belonging to Amanda hooked into the sides of his pull-ups and yanked downward at the same time. In a split second he'd been rendered nude. Cool air brushed across his penis. He looked down at it dangling there, flaccid and exposed to everyone in the room. Brian tried to cover himself, but Meggie had already rushed over and seized his hands, hopping about urging, "Pway, wanna pway." Brian nearly broke down into tears right there and then. Rachel could see his defeat and she just couldn't let him be alone like this. He tried to save her back in the potty room after all. Now it was her turn. "Can I go naked too?" she called out. Brian sniffled and looked over at Rachel like she'd grown a second head. "Oh, of course, sweetie," Amanda replied. "I don't think Joy would mind, do you?" she asked Sarah. "No, she won't care. We need to give them a bath later anyway," she agreed. "Okay, honey, let me help you get undressed," Amanda directed. Rachel swallowed her pride and let the woman slip her dress off, feeling a rush of shame as the cool air brushed across her bared breasts. As her pull-ups were slid down her legs and her bottom was exposed to the air as well, she forced herself to look at Brian. He better appreciate what she was doing for him. "Joy never mentioned Rachel being a little nudist like my Meggie," Amanda commented to Sarah. "Well, you know little kids, monkey see, monkey do," Sarah replied. Rachel wanted to slap the woman across the face, but instead she bit the side of her mouth and kept her lips sealed. "There we go, the three little bears." Amanda smirked. Then she gave Meggie a gentle pat on her bare bum. "Okay, on your way, ya little jaybirds." Brian wanted to dig his feet into the carpet and stand his ground, but his legs wouldn't cooperate. With each step the sliding door to the backyard grew closer. The brightness of the sun outside seemed blinding and somehow foreboding. Brian kept shaking his head and mumbling, "No, wanna play inside," to the mothers. "Don't be silly, dear, you need some fresh air," Mommy insisted, following him to the door. Brian blinked in the brightness and cringed as he felt the heat of the sun on his skin, emerging onto the deck. Rough wood gave way to soft grass under his soles and a warm breeze played across his pee-pee and bum as Brian made his way into the yard. He looked about desperately for some type of shelter. There were fences on all sides of the yard, but they weren't high enough to provide real privacy. Houses overlooked it on two sides. An older woman watering plants on her deck next door glanced down at the naked 20-somethings and smiled, giving them a condescending wave. Playing naked outside was downright degrading. Brian felt like a dog put outside because he wasn't housebroken. Meggie didn't mind one little bit, of course. She just ran helter-skelter about the grassy lawn, boobs bouncing free, tumbling and rolling about as if nothing could be more fun. Soon the soles of her feet were brown with dirt, her toes muddy and her knees grass-stained. Twigs and pieces of grass stuck out of her wild hair, and yet she couldn't have smiled and wider. Brian and Rachel sought shelter by the fence, crouching in the small shadow there. "Why'd you do it?" Brian asked. "So you wouldn't be alone," she shrugged. "Well, there was Megan." Rachel shook her head dismissively at their old friend who was chewing on a dandelion and some dirt pulled from the ground. "She doesn't count." "Not anymore." Brian nodded. Sarah appeared on the back deck carrying a pink potty seat. A moment later Amanda came out with a second one, setting it to face the other. "If you need to go potty, they're right here," Sarah told them. "This is so," Brian began. "What?" Rachel asked as he trailed off. Brian grasped his abdomen and looked at her with worry. I think I gotta go." "So, go then." "I won't look." "You heard your mommy, the potty is there." Not pee-pee," he mumbled. "Oh," Rachel nodded. Grunting again, Brian stood and hurried towards the deck, ignoring the feeling of his unhindered pee-pee swishing back and forth between his hairless thighs. His only thought was of making it to that potty in time. He did. Sitting swiftly on the seat and leaning forward to do his business in some sort of privacy. "Oh look Sarah, your little boy is using the potty already," Amanda called from just inside the house. Brian cursed her for calling attention to his predicament. Next thing he knew, his mommy and Sarah were out on the deck smiling down at him. Meggie hurried onto the deck herself and sat on a red plastic pushtrike. Rachel slowly ambled over, covering her breasts and trying not to stare. "Honey, come sit on the potty so you can make too," Amanda called to the girl, taking her hand and leading her reluctantly to the second potty seat. Now he and Rachel were each sat on a potty on the deck, naked in the sun, facing each other while everyone looked on expectantly. Bryant tried not to go now. He couldn't do it, not in front of all these people. But his body wasn't cooperating anymore. He felt sudden pressure and pushed in response. It was instinctual and he couldn't stop it after that. Everyone heard the rude noises erupting from the potty, the plop-plop of poopy dropping into it. Brian grunted and strained, just wanting it over with quickly now. As the sounds continued, his mommy knelt beside him, rubbing his bare back and crooning, "Good boy Brian, what a good boy you are, making poopis for mommy." Even Meggie was clapping her hands and feet as she sat on her pushtrike babbling, "Poopy. Poo-poo poo-poo." Even when that humiliation was over, the worst was still to come. Brian had barely finished his business when he found himself being stood up and led over the wall of the house. Mommy took out some wipes and he felt the cool moist things cleaning his bottom. He knew his position was revealing this whole messy ordeal to Rachel and Meggie, but he was powerless to resist. He just stared down at his toes and waited for it to be over. After the cleaning ordeal was over, they were allowed back inside to watch cartoons, while still sat naked on their two potty chairs. As if watching Winnie the Pooh wasn't bad enough, now he wasn't even allowed off his potty seat because he needed to set a good example for Rachel until she could make poopy too. As they sat there in silent humiliation, Sarah strode into the room carrying a pink toddler book. "Hey Amanda, where did you get this book?" she called. "It looks really familiar for some reason." The other mother came in from the kitchen and looked it over. "Oh yeah, I dunno where it's from. Just found it last night." "Why?" "Well, I'm pretty sure The Catcher in the Rye is one of Brian's books." Brian and Rachel's heads snapped to attention at those words. There was the book. But it didn't look anything like the book they wanted. What had happened to it? Oh, Meggie must have taken it by mistake when they played yesterday. You can take it back, of course. What's it about anyway? That's a funny title. Seems to be about a little rabbit who doesn't want to grow up, she said, flipping through the pages. Oh, I can understand that, Sarah nodded. I mean, just look how much trouble Brian is having learning the potty. Things were so much easier when he was little. I know, Amanda agreed. I wish we could just keep them our little bundles of joy a bit longer. Brian and Rachel's eyes went wide and the whole world seemed to freeze as the book in the mommy's hands began to glow once again.